offers before to take over Greyhound, but then in the midst of the pandemic 2.5 years ago, we had this fantastic opportunity to buy the brand and the network. When we took on Greyhound onto the Flix tech platform for network management, revenue management, we saw the highest unit economics in more than 100 years of Greyhound history.
My vision is to transform long-distance bus travel in the United States and make it one of the top considerations for anyone planning a long-haul journey.
CEO Kai Boyson imagines even more potential if state and local governments recognize the need to support long-distance bus travel with integrated infrastructure.
We need to think about the infrastructure in the United States holistically and think about the transportation system as one integrated system. And intercity bus needs to be an integral part of that system. One should be able to connect from one mode of transport to another seamlessly, easily. We have great success models in the United States. For example, Los Angeles Union Station, Boston South Station, or New York Port Authority Bus Terminal, or Washington, D.C. Union Stations.
Kai and the team, they are doing a fantastic job. They have really improved the product, they have improved technology, they have really made the production more efficient, that at the moment it's also a profitably growing business.
There is this real momentum from Wall Street. We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. The Trump administration's begun carrying out the president's directives on undocumented immigrants. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says deportation flights have begun. CBS New York's Allie Bauman says agents arrested several people working at a store in Newark, New Jersey. She spoke to the owner.
Do you think that this is going to deter your other employees from showing up to work?
Yes, exactly. That's the question. That's not really helping my business, obviously, or any business.
Mr. Trump has just left the White House for a visit to hurricane-ravaged western North Carolina. WNCN TV's Dina Harley reports from Raleigh.
The visit comes as Democratic Governor Josh Stein has also promised to cut through red tape to help the western side of the state.
We must fast-track getting people back into their homes as quickly as possible. We must support small business owners so they can keep powering our economy for the decades to come.
With FEMA help already extended but more aid needed, North Carolina Republicans are confident in the president's promises to support the state alongside other leaders.
President Trump's second stop today, Southern California, to tour areas hard hit by the wildfires. Governor Newsom didn't receive a public invite, but he says he'll be at the airport anyway to welcome Mr. Trump.
I look forward to being there on the tarmac to thank the president, welcome him, and we're making sure that all the resources he needs for a successful briefing are provided to him.
The president's criticized Newsom with false claims the governor and local officials prevented the flow of water from the north into L.A. to help fight the fires. The stage is set for another hostage release in Gaza tomorrow. CBS's Rami Inocencio from Tel Aviv.
Hamas is expected to hand over the names of 4 more Israeli hostages any time now. A Hamas official says all 4 will be female soldiers and would be swapped for 200 Palestinian detainees and prisoners.
Massive windstorms battered Ireland and Scotland. Gusts reached a record 114 miles an hour. The BBC's David Wallace Lockhart is in Scotland.
Much of Scotland is at a standstill, with the red weather warning stretching across the whole breadth of the country, taking in all of the densely populated central belt, including the cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh. Tens of thousands of households have been without power.
This morning at California's Vanden Vandenberg Space Force Base.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Elon Musk's SpaceX launched a rocket to deploy 23 Starlink satellites into a low Earth orbit. This is CBS News.
With ZipRecruiter.
A couple of reality TV alums are suing over the California wildfires.
You know, one of my favorite things about my house burning down?
Spencer Pratt has put his name back in the public eye with a flurry of social media posts after he and wife Heidi Montag lost their home in the Palisades fire. Now the couple has joined 20 other homeowners in a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and the Department of Water and Power. Pratt has hustled to earn money by asking his followers to boost his wife's 15-year-old album. Superficial then hit #1 on iTunes. Wendy Gillette, CBS News.
A note on the Oscar nominations. She can sing, dance, and act too. If Cynthia Erivo wins an Academy Award for Best Actress, that'll make her an EGOT winner. She would also become the youngest ever to win an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
All right, good Friday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. To our worldwide audience, we're streaming live on YouTube as well. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney with you here in New York City. A lot coming up this morning. We got some economic data coming out this morning. We'll break that down. John Tucker will have some latest there for us as well. Looking at this market here, we got kind of a mixed market. Alex, I'm not sure if I'm going to get too crazy, but we had a good week.
Yeah.
S&P 500 up 4% year to date in this very through the month of January. So that's not too bad. So we'll see what's happening going forward. Let's check in with John Tucker and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. That'll start us all off. Actually, we go to you, John, first? Or
no, we do not.
Because we got the eco data out
We're
today.
data eco data. We are data dependent, and we got that UMISH number, that final read.
So let's go to Joanne Shu. Surveys of consumers, director for the University of Michigan. University of Michigan sentiment came out 71.1. The consensus was 73.2. Joanne, what does the data tell you here?
Consumers are really not sure about what's going to be going on in the future, particularly with this administration change. We're, of course, seeing partisan differences. Republicans are feeling pretty optimistic about the future, Democrats less so, and this is really coming down to a difference in opinion about what Trump's anticipated policies are going to result in for the economy.
What about the inflation expectations? Like, what kind of changes did we see there? Because, of course, we're all waiting to see if tariffs do come down, will they wind up being inflationary?
So inflation expectations for the short run, they surged quite a bit between December and January, and they went up as well for the long run, 3.0 in December, 3.2 this month. Consumers are really quite concerned about tariffs, and actually concerned in different ways. Democrats, people who believe that tariffs are better for the economy, they think that inflation is going to plummet. People who think that tariffs are bad for the economy, they think that inflation is going to come surging back. So overall, consumers have already incorporated expected tariffs into their economic attitudes.
All right, Joanne, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Joanne Shu, surveys of consumers, director for the University of Michigan. Again, University of Michigan headline number came out, sentiment number 71.1 was the actual. The consensus was 73.2. and it was 73.2 in the prior period. So as Joanne was saying, some concern out there, perhaps about some changes in economic policies, at least initially. Now we go to John Tucker.
There we go.
For the Bloomberg Business Flash. John, thank you.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI exceed 2.8% in January 2025? Trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 35%. Buy yes or no, earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. Well, after the S&P 500 notched another record yesterday, major stock averages today mixed. Donald Trump appeared to soften his approach toward tariffs and China, and that has been a big focus for investors. Right now, the S&P 500, it is a record, but up half a point, 6119. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 131 points, a decline of 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100 right now just 11 points lower. Meantime, Margie Patel at Allspring Global Investments says, you know what? Profit growth this year should have the stock market outperforming.
Last year, you had the economy growing, say 2.5%. This year, it looks like more of the same, although maybe we'll have surprises on the upside of growth. And that was enough to produce S&P revenues of 4% last year and profit growth overall of above 12%. So I think that we'll see more or less that same thing.
After those UMISH numbers, I'll go right to yields. The 2-year down 3 basis points, that's 425. The 10-year is 1 basis point lower, and that is at 462. Texas Instruments shares, they're down 5.6%. The worst performer in the S&P 500. They gave a disappointing earnings forecast. Best performer, Moderna. Shares of Moderna, mRNA up. mRNA, the ticker symbol, those shares were climbing. I think this is because Oracle Chairman Larry Ellison was talking about the role of artificial intelligence in revolutionizing cancer treatment. And the big news of the day, Panda Cam is back at the Washington National Zoo. Bao Li and Qing Bao are back. And last check, one of them was, I can't tell the difference. One of them was climbing a tree. So that's.
No, they're eating bamboo. Are they climbing a tree
now? Eating bamboo and climbing a tree.
They're not the most graceful animals, are they?
But they're just so cute, the fur. Oh my God, they just sit there with their big eyes.
And they rip your face off.
Well, yeah, I don't want to hug them, but I'm going to watch the Panda Cam the whole day. You betcha.
Anyway, that's your market update. We do it all the time right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. Alex.
I don't know why he's just laughing at me. I think he's thinking about me and a panda. All right. Happy Friday, guys. We made it. Alex Steele here, Paul Sweeney, John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the news that you need: business, economics, and finance. All right, let's get more in depth on some of these names that are moving in the market. Meta, quite interesting. We're joined now by Norm Melinda, Bloomberg Equities reporter. So Meta, more CapEx. So interesting. I mean, it doesn't hit Microsoft's $80 billion, but nonetheless.
Right. It is still a very strong number. So we had Mark Zuckerberg, he posted on Facebook this morning. He said that Meta should be spending up to $65 billion on AI in 2025. So that's about $15 billion more than what the average analyst on Wall Street was expecting. So we're working with a really big number here. But he's saying, quote, that the data centers that they'll be building with these funds will be, quote, so large that it would cover a significant part of Manhattan. So it's a really ambitious thing that they're really hoping to build out the data centers. And as we think about a lot of these names, it was one of the best performers in the Mag 7 last year for 2024. But when we think about Meta, it's more social media focused, and they're really trying to branch out into a cloud business like a lot of their competitors have. So the question sitting here for investors is, how do they monetize, and what will they be using this spending on, and whether or not it'll be an efficient decision for them. But we are seeing shares higher right now. They were lower in pre-market, but we're seeing them higher, still hitting an intraday high as they hit yesterday as well.
52-week high. Just looking at the FA function for Meta, CapEx in 2020 was about $23.5 billion. Again, the consensus for 2025, $50 billion, so a double there.
Right.
Now, on top of that,
add another 15.
10 to 15 billion. That is just, I guess this AI, I guess it's a thing.
I guess it's
a
yes,
thing.
There we
Yes,
go.
okay.
Real deal
Might be
here
a
is
thing,
what you
Paul.
said on the Bloomberg Intelligence podcast.
Right.
But obviously good for suppliers like an NVIDIA,
Right.
for example, which is one of its big suppliers as well. But it's just so interesting because you have to wonder how long these cycles go until you need to deliver the goods of how the payoff is coming and what the ROI is on AI.
Most definitely.
Yeah. All right. What else you got?
I'm also taking a look at Verizon. So we are seeing shares up as much as 3.8%. That's the biggest intraday advance that we've seen for the stock since September. And this is after they reported fourth quarter results that beat estimates. They pointed toward gains in new mobile and broadband customers. We do have other companies like AT&T and T-Mobile reporting in the coming days, but broadband was really a bright spot for this company, and we are seeing Wall Street rewarding them off of it.
All right, Nor, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Nor Melinda joining us, Bloomberg Equities reporter. It has been quite a week, quite a 5 days for President Trump and the new administration. Yep. So many executive orders signed, and then a lot of inputs on what we're going to get in terms of tariffs. The interesting thing overnight was that Trump reportedly told Fox that he wasn't a fan of putting tariffs on China, that he'd rather not do that. Brendan Murray, Bloomberg Global Trade reporter, is joining us from London. Hey, Brendan, what did you make of that statement?
Yeah, it was. It's just the latest in a real roller coaster week that we've seen and heard from the president in his first 5 days. And it kind of reminds me of the football games we're going to watch on Sunday. There's offense and there's defense in trade negotiations, and the president has a very aggressive offense. He puts countries on the back feet. He says, I'm going to slap 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, 10% on everybody else, and he really kind of puts them on notice that this is coming if they don't do what he's asking them to do to rebalance their trading relationship. The defensive side, I think, is one of the more interesting ones, and the ones we didn't really didn't see making headlines. These are the reviews that he wants of U.S. Of trade policy in these executive orders that he issued on Monday. This is the defense. This is how he's going to justify putting tariffs on. So you have these two tracks. The market will move on every statement he makes, whether they're dovish or hawkish on tariffs. The dollar will go up if tariffs look more likely than not. But the real thing to watch is what he does with tariffs, not what he says.
So, Brendan, you're the global trade editor for Bloomberg News. What are your sources telling you about what people really think is going to happen? Are we going to get across-the-board tariffs, or is this just Trump talking Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the real question. Is he bluffing? Is he not bluffing? Is he? I think most people think that there will be some tariffs in some form, probably more targeted than the sort of across the board universal tariffs that he's threatened on the campaign trail, at least last week. There's definitely going to be some. There's going to be a cost to pay for all of the trade imbalances, the trade surplus that China runs with the U.S., that Europe runs with the U.S. So there's definitely going to be an effort to fix some of those, but whether they're more surgical than just across the board is the big question. He's got a U.S. economy that he doesn't want to upset. He's got inflation that he doesn't want to reignite. So most economists and sort of the insiders that we're talking to are saying, just let's see how this plays out. There's a lot of fiery rhetoric being thrown around right now, but there's a method to the madness, some of these folks say.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because obviously back in 2016, 2017, we didn't have this inflation problem. So the leeway to impose tariffs and sort of let prices rise a little bit was okay. Now he clearly definitely does not want to do that, which definitely seems why the equity market is not taking any of the tariff stuff seriously at all. It's more like, yep, we know it's there, but we're focusing on that deregulation part and those lower corporate taxes.
Yeah, exactly. And, we'll see when the only issue with that is that just the uncertainty of tariffs can slow economic growth and corporate investment and hiring. We don't know what our costs are going to be over the next 6 to 12 months. That hovering over, CFOs of major American companies will be a headwind, and will, until it's resolved, will be be an issue that will hold back economic activity, which obviously the Fed is trying to figure out how quickly it's going to cut interest rates, and that could play this whole tariff question and the uncertainty around it could play into it could feed into those decisions as well.
All right, Brendan, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Brendan Murray, Global Trade Editor for Bloomberg News. I was a little surprised, Alex, by the UMich data coming a little weaker than expected, because I've been sensing pretty vibrant optimism in the marketplace post-election, pro-growth government and maybe less regulation and so on and so forth, but a little bit of a disappointment there.
Yeah, I just think it's also so bifurcated along political lines as well. I have to point out, existing home sales, though, month on month, up by 2.2%. Okay. So that was actually pretty solid, considering that you have 30-year mortgage rates around 7%. All right, coming up, Barry Ritholtz, the man himself, will be joining us for his take on the market. Happy Friday.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. And we are being brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in January 2025 be greater than 34 degrees? Trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 14, it says here percent, I think that's degrees. Buy yes or no, earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. S&P 500 right now, little change, down 3 points, so drifting around yesterday's closing record. And then, of course, we got the consumer sentiment. That declined in January for the first time in 6 months. There were concerns about unemployment, also the impact of potential tariffs on the rate of inflation. The final January sentiment index for the University of Michigan decreasing to a 3-month low. Also, we had sales of previously owned homes in the U.S. rising for the 3rd straight month in December. So we're entering 2025 with some momentum after the worst year in nearly 3 decades. Some of the individual stocks on the move, you have Verizon Communications. Those are up right now 1.3%, one of the stronger forces pushing up at the S&P 500. It delivered results for the latest quarter, edging past analyst expectations. And then the story about Novo Nordisk, their U.S. listed shares jumping after the company reported results from a clinical trial of a treatment for people who are overweight or obese. S&P 500, 5 points lower now, 6113 on the index. The Dow down 103 points. The NASDAQ 100, 39 points lower. That is down 0.2%. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. The easiest way to find it, I found, is just go to YouTube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast Live, and it comes right up. So how tough is that? It is Friday, which means we talk to one B. Ritholtz, Barry Ritholtz. He does this podcast thing. I think it's kind of popular. The host of Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio is also the founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. Barry, make America great again. One could look at the economic data and say, country's doing pretty well. How do you think about it?
Yeah, this is the second time President Trump, first in 2017, now in 2025, inherited a really robust economy. So just look at the previous year. And when you look at his first term, the worst effects of the financial crisis had faded. Things had been on the upswing, at least enough for President Obama to get reelected in 2012. By 2016, we were really flying. The market was at a new all-time high, and the economy was doing pretty well. Here we are, 2025. 2024 GDP is going to be pretty close to 3% for the year. Unemployment is at 4.1%. That's close to full employment. Inflation is back under 3%, heading towards 2%. We can argue if 2% is a credible inflation target in a fiscal stimulus environment, but 2.7% headline CPI. Wages are higher, markets are at record highs, corporate profits are at record highs. I could make the case that America is already, at least economically speaking, pretty great.
Right. So that makes me feel 2 things. One, either freaked out that there's only room for downside, or 2, well, then you add on, say, deregulation, and you add on lower taxes, and we're going to see some better times too.
So first, it's very hard to say the economy is doing really well, and like a person who's enjoyed a great, healthy, long lifespan, they don't just suddenly roll over and die. The economies don't just trip and face plant, at least not developed large economies like the U.S. So, I have coming up in a week or so, Torsten Slok from Apollo Global Management.
Yeah, we were both big fans.
And he puts the risk of recession at 0%. Listen, I don't put anything at 0%, but a meteor that killed the dinosaurs, there's more than a 0% chance that happens this weekend. But it's close to 0%. So I think what he's trying to say is this economy is firing on all cylinders. Wherever you look, there is strength. And if you look at how poorly the rest of the economists' world have done over the past few years, consistently forecasting recession, slowdown, I think they underestimate the strength of the U.S. economy. If you look around, we have are suffering from labor shortages, housing shortages, automobile shortages. That's a big driving factor in preventing any sort of softness to happen, because anytime, a new house gets built, it gets bought up right away. Anytime there are qualified people in a labor pool, they get hired right away. And so it's, to say nothing of all of the positive activity we've seen over the past few years, not just AI, but data centers and software and technology. Those things tend to have momentum, and they tend to persist. That's not a week-to-week or month-to-month economic factor. Those are drivers that can last years and years, almost a decade. So we just have a lot of economic tailwinds behind us, and people have just been way too negative. That's before we get to the positives. And this administration is potentially a mixed bag. There are risks and opportunities. But from a market perspective, there certainly are a lot of opportunities coming.
Barry, are you concerned at all about potential headwinds coming from either tariffs or material changes to immigration policy that may be inflationary, that may harm the labor market, any of those types of things?
Yeah, everything comes down to interest rates. All the risky, so there are risky policies from the Trump administration, and there are opportunistic policies from Trump 2.0. The risky policies all come down to interest rates. The wild card factor of geopolitics, I have no idea what he's going to do with China, Russia, the Middle East. Risk of, let's not even talk about war, just disruption is problematic. I don't know how else to describe tariffs other than a price increase paid for by domestic consumers. The Fed has talked about tariffs as inflationary and potentially preventing even more rate decreases. When Trump actually made his presentation at Davos, he not only called on lower oil prices from OPEC, he called for lower rates from all the central banks around the world. Well, we import a ton of oil and petroleum products from Canada. If you're going to slap a 10 or a 20% level rate on that, guess what? That's going to be inflationary. So I'm a little concerned about this. My wishful thinking is, hey, this is a negotiating tactic. And to be fair, much of the tariffs around the world are not even-handed. You cannot have a 10, 20, 30% tariff on U.S. goods, and it's less manufactured goods than it is agricultural or all the energy we're exporting, liquefied natural gas, as well as various forms of petroleum. There needs to be some fairness and parity. So while many of my friends on the left scream about, oh, this is going to be terrible, hey, there's a case to be made. There's a reasonable negotiation to get some fairness. It has to be a two-way street. It can't just be American consumers, wealthy though they are, paying most of the tariffs in the world. That doesn't seem to be fair. Hopefully, we can get some positive resolution to the tariff question.
So, and then it all brings back to sequencing, right? Like tariffs will probably hit faster than maybe deregulation and corporate taxes, but the sequencing may not matter if we know that, say, deregulation and corporate taxes are coming. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a really interesting question, because I have no idea of what the sequencing is going to be like. Anything that's going to require Congress is going to take longer. But a perfect example, the FTC under President Biden was pretty aggressive in restraining M&A activity. To be fair, the FTC has been asleep at the switch for 3 decades and have allowed an intense concentration of corporate power. Anyone who's bought a concert ticket knows how ridiculous the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger was allowed. And you could say the same thing about a lot of other technology mergers that have been allowed. There's far fewer healthcare companies, far fewer energy companies. It's really become a little bit of a corporatocracy. But a defanged FTC is going to allow more M&A activity. Generally, that's supportive of higher market prices. There'll be no scrutiny on stock buybacks, so that tends to support higher prices. You know, the IPO market's been pretty dead for a few years. That's going to start coming back to life, as well as secondaries, to say nothing of the deregulation to specific sectors. So think about healthcare and energy. I can't, it's hard to imagine. We've been producing record amounts of oil in the United States the past few years. They're going to open up even more areas. Now the politics of that is a little bit divisive, but just being cold-blooded and looking at it from an economic perspective, hey, more energy means lower, more petroleum means lower oil prices, which is anti-inflationary. Same with materials. Energy and materials were two of the worst sectors last year. Maybe they catch a bit.
Barry, real quick, what are you driving this weekend?
In this weather, the truck, I'm gonna be out in something with heated seats and a heated steering wheel, and I don't really care about handling or I'm looking out my home office window. Everything is still snowed over, still iced over, and the thermostat says we're still in the teens. Hopefully by Sunday we'll get out of this deep freeze and I could take something out. Like any of the fun cars, their tires are just terrible in 20-degree weather. They have no grip.
All right.
Well, also though, teens is kind of a heat wave. So at this point, look at it that way.
We're getting up to the 30s on Sunday, so we're looking.
I mean, that's like bathing suit weather. Barry, we appreciate you. Thank you very much, Barry Ritholtz, founder and CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management. Really interesting that he is.
Just looking at Barry's note, and I just saw here he has a quote unquote a footnote, and says, you know, after all this very strong economic data that he goes through, GDP at 3%, unemployment at 4.1%, on and on and on. A footnote from Barry Ritholtz: for an incumbent party to lose the White House with this sort of economic data is political malpractice. So that's pretty strong words.
I mean, again, those price of eggs.
Yep, exactly.
Price of milk. There we go. But nonetheless, equity market, they're cheering that. This is just a good stat. We're going to keep saying it, right? The best start of the year for a president since 1985. Today we're a little bit softer and it's a little bit mixed, right? So you got Meta getting dinged a little bit because of more spending, but then you have Broadcom, which is a supplier of AI infrastructure to Meta, surging today. So a little bit mixed. Also, just to recap on that economic data, right? Existing home sales did pretty well within the last month. And also you had the UMich on the flip side declining for the first time in a few months as inflation expectations tick just a little bit higher. All right, coming up, we're going to go to the commodity world here. He's not dealing with teen weather.
No,
well, actually, what is the weather in Florida?
I'm just going to say 75 and sunny. I have no idea in Miami.
It could be cold then. Anyway, Mike McGlone will be here. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash, and we are being brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in January 2025 be greater than 34 degrees? Well, trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 14%. By yes or no, earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. Major stock averages slightly lower. About 270 stocks in the S&P 500 were higher, 230 lower. Also, volume about 3% lighter than usual for this time of day. 6 of the 11 major industry groups are higher. Utilities, communication services in the lead. And you had that University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index dropping this month for the first time in 6 months. That data highlights household concerns about potential tariffs as well as inflation. Meantime, Amanda Gotti at PNC Bank focused on valuations and earnings growth for stocks.
Our view on this is that valuation this year, as opposed to the last few years, is going to be a key governor in terms of the market's path forward. That does not mean I am overly bearish this year. We still think market returns for this year are going to be strong.
Among the earnings, you had Verizon Communications. They reported fourth quarter financial results. They beat estimates. Also gains in new mobile phone and broadband customers. Verizon shares right now 1.6% higher. Meta Platforms, they plan to invest as much as $65 billion with a B on projects related to artificial intelligence this year. And that comes, of course, ahead of the earnings next week for the start of the Mag 7 reporting season. S&P 500, 5 points lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 107. The NASDAQ 100, 45 points lower. You want to guess the temperature in Central Park right now?
Well, I know it because you said it.
No, I didn't say
You
it.
didn't say it? I thought you were this.
No,
okay, I'm going to say no, 12 degrees.
No, it's actually warming up 29 degrees.
Oh, my gosh.
And
guys.
Paul, I showed picture the picture of the ice outside my window.
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook Bay. And it's freezing up.
Which I was surprised because I thought that salt water, but I guess it's a mixture of salt and fresh water from the Shrewsbury River.
It's a little briny, but yeah.
I guess like at some point it's just that cold.
It is that
and
cold.
Just,
And the cool thing is the little seals come up and sit on the ice floes.
Okay, can you get a picture for me, please?
If I see the seal this week, I will.
Seals, Panda Cam, guys, and it's Friday. What could be better?
And the ice boats are back in the Navesink River in Red Bank.
Okay, we'll check that out.
Small sections of it, but they can go.
Okay.
I love this whole
Fun
conversation.
Stuff to do. Jersey.
I'm Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news and weather, business, economics, and finance. Why not? Through our lens for Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. Now I want to go down to Miami to Mike McGlone, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Commodity Strategist. Hello. And we will definitely get to the commodity stuff, but we hear it's cold down there for you.
Well, good morning. Hello. Our low this morning was 48. But I find complaining about the weather this time of year in Miami with people up north doesn't go over well.
No, it does not go over well. Did you have to
But I did check the weather, and we'll be back in the mid-70s next week for our friends in Miami.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I'll actually be in Miami for 12 hours.
Yes.
So I'll let you know as I walk from conference to conference. Hey, Mike, going to the actual serious stuff. I'm looking at gold here, for example, 27.82. Oh. Bank of America's Michael Harnett said that we would look for a risk-on catalyst maybe if gold went above 2,800. Does gold go above 2,800 anytime soon?
A matter of time. The key thing I'm worried about gold is last year had major competition from Bitcoin, yet it still outperformed the stock market. Gold was up 27%, S&P 500 is up 25%. That's not a good sign. When all this competition, yet the rocket's still beating stocks, so I don't see what stops it from going up. And I'm really worried at some point when Gina Martin Adams is right and the stock market backs up a little bit, it's going to just accelerate the gold rally.
So how do you think about gold versus Bitcoin? What's the relationship there that we've seen over time?
One of my favorite crosses, Paul, I've been watching that one for 10 years. Gold, Bitcoin, right now it takes about 38 ounces of gold per one Bitcoin. That's right about the peak of 2021. The problem is it's not going much higher. It's inching higher. And to me, the risk is that we have so much enthusiasm, and certainly from our new administration, for Bitcoin and cryptos, that as a commodity person who's inherently contrarian, you kind of look the other way. I'm really worried that that ratio is more likely to tick down. And a key pressure for that would be if the stock market goes down, because the key thing is gold has a history of zero correlation to the stock market, and Bitcoin is right now is the highest, the greatest correlation ever to the stock market on a 100-day basis on the way up. So we see the risks there.
Well, but for crypto/Bitcoin, what is moving it? Like, is it that fundamental real stuff that would move gold, for example, right? Supply and demand, or is it going to be those animal spirits and that risk on?
It's one person. Our president has shifted from antagonist to zealot, and that was a bit of a shocker. It's nice to see that he's realized, well, a space that went to the dollar as its base layer and invests in treasuries is probably good for the U.S. dollar and government. Now, he's flipped over, and there's basically a bit of a bargain he made with crypto people to make the price go higher, and he's doing that. The point is now there's one issue, as certainly you get it, Alex, in commodities. There's unlimited supply, ease of entry, and the last I checked on CoinMarketCap.com, there's 10,000 crypto wannabes who all want to be like Bitcoin. There's just massive supply in the space, massive speculation. And I think if we're going to look back from this future is that, yeah, things like Dogecoin, $51 billion, the same as BNY Mellon, is probably a little bit expensive.
There is a gold Bitcoin cross, ticker XBTXAU index, and it is at 38 times, and that is about as high. That is an all-time high. So that's for people out there on the terminal. Mike knows what he's talking about here. All right, Mike, how about crude oil here? What's your thought here? Because I think there's a lot of concerns here on the supply and demand out there.
Let's take a risk. I think it peaked at 80. I think it's going to 60. And now we have the president behind it, but he has everything in his favor. First of all, managed money net positions, what really drives the market and futures, they are way long. They got way long in the beginning of the year. Remember last year they got short around 65 in crude oil. The high last year was 85. We're stuck right in the middle, about 75. I think it's more likely to go towards 60 and has everything in its favor now. Momentum starting to turn over. All the managed money net positions and open interest got way long in the beginning of the year. A little bit too much optimism. The thing you learn as a commodity person, fade the trend, fade the consensus. So I think it's going to head lower now. The key thing is what makes it go up. But the bottom line for commodities, they almost always go with their cost of production. The U.S., that's $56 a barrel, and shut off that excess of supply out of the U.S. and Canada and declining demand from China. You basically have to get below that level. I think it's a matter of time. But I think for now it's peaked at 80. I think the next key stop is going to be around 60.
But, here you go, Mike.
There we go.
Here we go. On the flip side, so what I keep hearing is that what's going to lead oil lower is actually going to be President Trump lowering the cost of capital to produce oil in the U.S. through taxes, deregulation, like methane taxes, leasing on federal land, lowers the break even, which means oil can go lower. But that's going to be like a longer term thing. Immediately, we're dealing with potential sanctions on Russia, Iran, and Venezuela that could really impact the oil price to the upside.
It just makes their supply, excesses of supply, and their exports go to the gray market. We know how that works. It's just a matter of time how it works. And all Russia's supply is going to China, and China demands in decline. So, to me, in the macro, that would be wonderful. But also those things that people mention are big picture, long term. In the meantime, I think the thing that really matters now is positions got too long. The market's at the upper end of its range. And remember, the peak was 147 in 2008. It's half that price now, and it's heading lower. It's just we make more of it and use less of it on a daily basis, and we now have a new president that's going to continue to do that and accelerate it. So overall, crude oil it's a glut right now globally in terms of the trends in supply and demand.
And Mike and Alex, you guys, I'm watching Landman, so if you have any questions about the oil and gas business, throw them my way. I can help you guys out. Mike McGlone, Senior Commodity Strategist, Bloomberg Intelligence, manning the Bloomberg Intelligence Outpost in South Florida. We appreciate that. 60 before, WTI crude oil. Right here, it's $74.40.
Which, I was struck. It was Natasha Kaneva. She heads up global commodity strategy at J.P. Morgan, and she was the one who brought it to my attention in terms of lowering the cost of capital. That's really the nut behind President Trump, which makes a lot of sense because his energy whisperer for years has been Harold Hamm, who would be very concerned about corporate taxes, any kind of methane tax, any federal land lease cost. And so that made a lot of sense to me.
All I care about is $3.13 a gallon at the Wawa.
Yeah,
That feels higher, no?
Yes.
Yes, that's significantly
we were at 280 for a long time, 287, 290. So
Well,
we got to
okay.
get that down.
That's a different story because
Start
then we're
pumping some
dealing with heavy crude, and that's a Canada tariff thing. And
I didn't learn about that yet. So
I will
that episode hasn't
Alex
come up.
explain you guys in the break. All right, coming up, Julie Johnson, Bloomberg Aerospace reporter, joining us. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube. And I'm out there doing the YouTube, talking back and forth to people.
Wait, you are? Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait, can you tell me on break?
Yeah,
okay,
we'll
tell me on
take
break. Okay.
I mean, Tom Keene, he's all over it. Lisa Mateo's all over it. So we're doing that whole thing. So check us out. YouTube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast and live, and that's where you will find us here. Boy, if life for the folks at Boeing wasn't tough enough over the last several years, now you got Elon Musk getting up into your grill, and that is the subject of our big take story of the day. Musk Air Force One scrutiny tests Boeing's path to recovery. Julie Johnson joins us, Bloomberg Aerospace reporter, on this big take story. Elon Musk making surprise visits to Boeing. What's going on, Julie?
Yes, absolutely. Musk dropped in on Boeing San Antonio maintenance base in December, and we think met with the Boeing CEO just by tracking plane movements. And he was there to look into the progress and some of the pitfalls Boeing's faced with the Air Force One project, which is a key interest of Donald Trump's.
Right. So what does that mean in essence? Like, what are the Air Force One issues, and what was Musk trying to look into?
Well, so the planes are years late. The first one should have been in service last year. And by the way, these jets were ordered during Trump's first administration. In fact, one of the first things he did, first outreach to corporate America back in December 2016, was actually a tweet blasting the price that had been negotiated for these jets and, cancel order. And Boeing used that very cleverly to as an entry point into the new administration. They set up meetings with the president. They negotiated a deal. Trump was on board for these new jets. And this has been such a pet project for Trump that when he was out of office at Mar-a-Lago, according to colleagues who interviewed him there, he kept a model of these jets. And at the inaugural ball, Commander-in-Chief ball on Monday, he cut a cake presented by the Air Force with the new Air Force One jets. So for Trump, this is a project that he is deeply invested in. It's not gone well for Boeing for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's just like out of the book of Job. Everything that's gone wrong, from COVID to subcontractor going bankrupt to changing design and scope of mission, and I'm not sure that Boeing's managed this as well as they could have either. So the Boeing's new CEO, knowing that this would have an influence on the company's dealings with Trump, over the next 4 years, I think got out in front, from what I've heard, and set up a series of conversations with the president in November just to brief him on, here's what we've encountered, here's what we're trying to do, and Trump's response was along the lines of, let us know what we can do to help accelerate these jets. And then, few weeks later, Elon dropped in.
Yeah, and the thing about Elon, I mean, it seems like with his rocket company, SpaceX, isn't that a direct competitor to Boeing? Isn't there a conflict of interest there?
Well, yes and no. And I think under other administrations, this would be really something that raises eyebrows and questions around protocol. But this is not a typical administration. And I think if nothing else, this is just a reminder to the business community that the rules are very different this go round.
Where do you think that the Boeing CEO is going? How do you think he's going to be handling all this? He has a ton on his plate, and none of it good.
Well, some of it's good. I mean, they got out of the woods with a cash crisis right at the end of last year with a $24 billion equity sale that was just had attracted tons of interest. So there are people who are betting on Boeing to make a comeback, and the company's sitting on $500 billion in aircraft orders. The problem is that their factories have not been healthy, I would argue, since 2017 or 2018. So you've got a new guy. He's very much an operator. He's an engineer's engineer, which probably helped him in his dealings with Elon. And so he's got a ton on his plate, and now he's got this just like totally new landscape in Washington as well.
Yeah, that's why I said, okay, so some good. I'm just saying, it's a lot of risk. It's a lot of risk.
No, I know, totally.
Yeah, totally. All right. Thank you so much, Julie. We appreciate it. Julie Johnson, Bloomberg Aerospace reporter. You can check out the Big Take story on the Bloomberg. You can also check it out on Bloomberg.com/Big Take. Okay, coming up, we are going to be bringing you, speaking of DC, we'll be bringing you President Trump will be getting a briefing on the recovery for Hurricane Helene. This is part of his movement today, going to North Carolina and then going to California to look at the wildfire damage. We're going to bring you that when it happens. In the meantime, for our listeners in the United States, remember you can listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius XM channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM channel 121 is presented by Oracle. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. The next hour, Bloomberg Intelligence starts right now, with the market a little bit softer, even though these last 2 weeks for the S&P, the best start of the year for a president since 1985.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been in U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it through another week. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We have a great hour lined up for you. We're going to take a look at some of the economic data that just dropped at 10 o'clock that did move the markets with Michael McKee. Also, we'll take a look at the first week for President Trump with Gautam Mukunda, professor at Yale School of Management. Plus, it's Friday. Munis in focus. Munis under Trump. What are we going to do here, particularly when the wildfires have had an impact on the muni market in California as well? There's also one of the biggest IPOs out there. We're waiting for it to start trading, Venture Global. It's my jam, and Ruth Leal will break it down with us as well. She follows that company and LNG exports. But let's kick it all off, guys, with a Bloomberg Business Flash with John Tucker.
All right, guys, major stock averages slightly lower after a record close yesterday for the S&P 500. In the S&P 500, we have 6 of the 11 major industry groups. They are higher right now. It's being led by utilities and communication services. Energy, actually the biggest drag. Texas Instruments among the worst performing stock in the index after its earnings report. Meantime, Amy Will Silverman at RBC Capital Markets notes that investors are starting to demand protection for any market sell-off.
Been an interesting market, and it's been one that I've been calling the paddling duck market, because when you look at VIX and when you look at the market, it looks pretty calm and smooth on the surface, but underneath, those duck feet are paddling. You are seeing some pretty violent sector rotations.
Time for an earnings scorecard of the about 75 companies in the S&P 500 have announced results in the fourth quarter. 81% posting better than expected earnings. Compare that with 82% for the whole season a year ago. This according to data compiled by Bloomberg, and about 13 missed analyst earnings per share estimates compared with 14% a year ago. S&P 500 down 6, down 0.1%, 6112 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 100 points lower. The Nasdaq 100 down 53 points. That is down 0.25%. And we check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, John Tucker. And I should point out, we are also waiting for President Trump. He'll be getting a recovery briefing for Hurricane Helene. He'll be in North Carolina before he heads out to California. Yep. So we'll be looking forward to that, and we'll bring that to you as it begins.
Yeah, and I'll be at the Asheville area of North Carolina, which just got crushed with those hurricanes. It's strange because a lot of people, I remember seeing the interview, said, we specifically moved here from either the coasts or from Tornado Alley, or, just because we felt like this was, from a weather perspective, a benign place to live, and then boom.
And then boom.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, before we get to that, though, let's get some individual movers within the markets. Norma Linda back with us, Bloomberg Equities reporter. You are also looking at Boeing now, yeah?
Yeah, so I know you all were just talking about it. We're seeing Boeing shares down. They're paring their losses. They're down about 0.6%, but were earlier down more than 2%. And this is after they reported fourth quarter preliminary revenue that missed consensus estimates. They're saying that last year's strikes really affected the results. And they're also noting charges for some defense, space, and security programs, and calling out some costs that were related to job cuts that they previously announced. As we know, this stock has really been hard hit. I mean, last year, we had the stock shedding 32% at year end.
It's interesting. I would have expected the stock to be down 3, 4, 5, 6% today. It's only down less than 1%. This kind of tells me
bottoms in.
Bottoms in. I mean, it has rallied off of a 140 low, because I've been always saying over the last couple of years, this is a stock I want to own. This is a stock I want to own. I can see myself walking into my PM saying, okay, I'm calling the bottom here. only to be wrong like several times. But I don't know, maybe we are.
Maybe today's different.
Yeah, interesting.
What else are you looking at?
Also keeping an eye on American Express, that's ticker AXP. Now we're seeing American Express, it reported profits that increased 12%. They're pointing toward higher than expected spending on credit cards during the holidays, which makes sense. I know I was swiping my card quite a bit during the holiday season, but we're actually seeing shares of American Express down. They're falling as much as 3.7%. Now that's the worst day for the stock in a month. And this is after we have KBW and other analysts coming out saying that the results were good, but they believe that investors wanted more than the revenue guidance that was provided.
Yeah, interesting to see how that's going to wind up trading throughout the day.
I never use my Amex card.
What?
I mean, rarely. I
Why?
use my Visa card.
Oh, you know, I know. Because
That's fair.
I use Amex because of the Delta points.
Exactly.
I think that just came from a generation
Strategy.
when Amex was not for everyday use. It felt like it was special.
Well, also but
I don't know.
But for Amex, you traveled a lot as an investment banker, and that wasn't overseas. Like it couldn't, right? Wasn't it more Visa?
I don't know. I mean, I've had a corporate Amex forever, or back when we did have the corporate.
Until we switched, right?
Yeah. And I worked that baby out back in the day.
Sure. You really want to
swipe.
plastic.
Thank you, Redo.
All of that's really important. All right, what else are you looking at?
I mean, of course, Meta, keeping an eye there. And of course, this is after Mark Zuckerberg said in a post earlier this morning on Facebook that he expects that Meta will spend as much as $65 billion on AI efforts this year. And that's about $15 billion more than what the street was expecting in terms of CapEx. So this is all coming out ahead of tech earnings, which we know do begin next week. And we have Meta earnings coming out on Wednesday. So interesting to go to social media.
Frothy to me. This feels almost... It just feels frothy in terms of this rush to spend money on AI. And I think we're going to look back in a year or so and say, boom, that was a weird announcement from Meta.
I can't disagree with you, but I just think it when the ROI for AI is up.
Yes,
like when that ticket comes due. And I don't know if we're necessarily...
We don't know yet.
There yet.
So interesting. All right, Nora. Thank you so much, Nora Melinda, giving us the update on these markets here. Let's bring Michael McKee, Bloomberg International Economics and Policy Correspondent. We got some data today. I mean, you know, they beat Ohio State, but the UMich sentiment here was a little weak today.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little higher in Ohio now that they're
Yes.
going to have that drone factory built there.
Right.
But, yeah, it declined in the latter part of January to Inauguration Day. This survey ended on Inauguration Day.
Oh, okay.
And we see the headline go down from 73.2 to 71.1. People were much more pessimistic about the current conditions and about their expectations. And when you look at the numbers underneath, according to the University of Michigan folks, a lot of it has to do with Donald Trump and people's concerns about what tariffs may do to inflation and the cost of goods. They note that 68% of the people they surveyed do not want tariffs, and 19% do.
So if I'm Trump, and nobody reads the political wins better than this guy, arguably, and it's what got him elected twice. I put tariffs on the table, maybe. I mean, off the table.
You know, the problem is we don't exactly know how Donald Trump thinks, but we do know what he thinks, and that is that tariffs are really, really good. If he were listening to outside advice, even more than 9 out of 10 doctors with camels, 9,000 out of 10,000 doctors
Well, speaking
would say,
of
do not put tariffs.
Speaking of Donald Trump, we're going to dip into some comments he's making now outside Air Force One on his trip to North Carolina. Let's take a listen.
If that's Biden's fault or whose fault it is, but we're going to take over and we're going to do a good job. We're going to assign Mr. Waitlist, who's fantastic, frankly, and the governor and everybody else that's going to work. We're going to supply the money, supply a lot of the money. Maybe you have to chip in something. You'll chip in a little something, like maybe 25% or whatever. But we're going to get it done as quickly as we can. And we want to take care of the people of North Carolina. It's so interesting. Everybody's talking about California, and that's a mess. But I said, I'm not going to California until I stop in North Carolina. So here we are. We're going to go visit the site, and we're going to work with probably 3 of the congressmen, Republican congressmen, who've been fantastic, whose areas have been affected. And with Michael Waitlist, the governor, and whoever else is, we decide to get involved. Probably less FEMA, because FEMA just hasn't done the job. And we're looking at the whole concept of FEMA. I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me. But this is probably one of the best examples of it not working. And there's been some others, like in Louisiana, etc. So we're going to be doing something on FEMA that I think most people agree. I'd like to see the states take care of disasters. Let the state take care of the tornadoes and the hurricanes and all of the other things that happen. And I think you're going to find it a lot less expensive. You'll do it for less than half, and you're going to get a lot quicker response. So that seems to be the recommendation, but we'll be making that recommendation over the next couple of weeks. We're going to go to the site now, and we're going to figure out a plan for really demolition and cleaning, because not a lot's been done, and we're very disappointed in the Biden administration, but we're going to make up for lost time. And I said I'd do that, and this is about the earliest we could possibly be here, and we're honored to be here. This has been a great state. They're great people, and they've really been mishandled. But it's all, this group is going to be great, and we're going to get it taken care of. Any questions?
How will you respond to FEMA? Do you expect to ask Congress for additional aid for North Carolina and California?
It will be direct. In other words, the aid will go through us. So rather than going through FEMA, it will go through us. And I think maybe this is a good place to start. Because, and in all fairness to the governor, in all fairness to everybody else, FEMA was not on the ball. And we're going to turn it all around. Yes.
A lot of Americans think that this is symbolic of what your campaign was all about. America first, putting your priorities to Americans, even going to California, where their policies might have been one of the biggest reasons why they've had these problems. But you're putting the American people first. Your thoughts on that?
We are. Thank you. I like that question. Boy, I want more questions like that. That's even a statement. Thank you very much. He's a good man, that guy. And he's also a very professional reporter, I have to say. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're putting America first. We're putting, in this case, North Carolina and California. We're going to do a good job in California. That is a disaster like, I don't know if we've ever seen anything like it, frankly. They say the biggest in the history of California. I think, has anything bigger than that happened in the whole country ever? It looks like, I don't want to say what it looks like, but you know what I'm going to say. It looks like something hit it, and we won't talk about what hit it, but it is a bad, bad situation. And I guess I'm going to meet with some government officials, but I mean, much more importantly, and in California, just to revert to it for a second, millions of gallons of water are waiting to be poured down through already the half pipes that are already built. I mean, they've been up for 40 years, and about 20 years ago, they turned off the water. And it's the water that comes from the Pacific Northwest. Some of it comes out of Canada, and it flows there, and it probably has flowed there for 1 million years. And they turned it off, and they routed out to the Pacific. And in the meantime, you don't have water in the hydrants, you don't have water in the sprinkler systems. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And everyone's trying to figure out, why aren't they turning it back? They say it's the Delta smelt, it's a fish, but I find that hard to believe, but we'll figure it out. And without doing that, you're going to continue to have problems.
Mr. President, what are you prepared to do, sir, if OPEC doesn't respond to your call to cut oil prices?
Well, we want to see OPEC cut the price of oil, and that will automatically stop the tragedy that's taking place in Ukraine. It's a butchering tragedy for both sides, by the way. Tremendous number of Russian soldiers are dead. Tremendous number of Ukrainian soldiers, and a lot of people are dead from the bombing of the cities. But right now, it's just bullets whacking and hitting men, mostly men, almost in all cases men. And over 1 million men are killed, and they're losing thousands of people a week. It's crazy. It's a crazy war, and it never would have happened if I was president. It would never have happened. This is crazy that it happened, but we want to stop it. Now, one way to stop it quickly is for OPEC to stop making so much money and to drop the price of oil, because they have it nice and high. And if you have it high, that war's not going to end so easily. So OPEC ought to get on the ball, and they ought to drop the price of oil, and that war will stop right away.
Mr. President, funding to Los Angeles because of its sanctuary city policy?
I want to see two things in Los Angeles: voter ID, so that the people have a chance to vote, and I want to see the water be released and come down into Los Angeles and throughout the state. Those are the two things. After that, I will be the greatest president that California has ever seen. I want the water to come down and come down to Los Angeles, and also go out to all the farmland that's barren and dry. You know, they have land that they say is the equivalent of the land in Iowa, which is about as good as there is anywhere on earth. The problem is it's artificial, because they artificially stop the water from going onto the land. So I want two things. I want voter ID for the people of California, and they all want it. Right now, you don't have voter ID. People want to have voter identification. You want to have proof of citizenship. Ideally, you have one-day voting, but I just want voter ID as a start, and I want the water to be released, and they're going to get a lot of help from the U.S. Thank you very much. I'll see you in a little while. We'll see you at the site. We'll see you at the site.
You've been listening to President Trump. He was receiving a briefing in North Carolina on Hurricane Helene and the recovery efforts there. He also took questions from reporters. Some of the headlines here is that he's going to supply money to take care of North Carolina. He also has some harsh words for FEMA, saying that FEMA hasn't done the job, and that will have less FEMA less involved in hurricane recovery, and he really wants states to take care of disasters that come your way. Let's circle back to some of that economic data. Housing starts actually doing pretty well. University of Michigan, though, declining, really, though, on party lines. Mike McKee, Bloomberg National Economics and Policy Correspondent, still with us. I appreciate that, it's like, what, a 6-month low, or dropped for the first time in 6 months, but it is along party lines, so it's hard to take a full read here.
It is along party lines, and the Michigan folks say Republicans tend to answer the survey more than Democrats. So
that's interesting.
The new administration gets a bump from that, but you see this axes crossing every time there's a change of control in Washington. Under the Biden years, everybody was excited about the economy on the Democratic side and miserable on the Republican side, and now it's completely reversed. We don't make a whole lot out of the sentiment numbers. I always go back to the old line from Alan Greenspan: we watch what consumers do rather than what they say. But Joanne Shu, who directs surveys for the University of Michigan, notes that people have ramped up their spending on cars and big ticket items, and she thinks it's in part a response to the idea that tariffs are going to come in and prices are going to go up, and we do see inflation expectations on a one-year basis elevated now. They've gone up since the election of Donald Trump, so that may be part of it. I want to mention, you mentioned existing home sales, Alex. They were one of the best of the year in terms of the percentage increase. However, this was the worst year for existing home sales since 1995 when you look at the total. And part of the reason that we may have seen a big bump is, you remember when mortgage rates went down, when the Fed started cutting rates. Well, that's when everybody signed their contracts. And then
existing or locked in their mortgages.
Locked in their mortgages. Existing home sales are based on when you close.
Right.
So people have closed, and that shows up in this data here. It's still a very bad existing home sales market, and now mortgage rates have gone up again. So don't look for relief there, unfortunately.
So, I mean, is inflation the number one concern for the folks you talk to out there?
It still is. And even though we've seen the rate of inflation fall, people always come back to the level. And I was just out in the Midwest on assignment last week, and you just hear people say, costs are up, costs are up, costs are up. They're not going up as fast, but people aren't noticing that. They're noticing the fact that inflation is up. Now, a lot of it is things that the Fed, that nobody can really do anything about. Donald Trump said once he was elected to bring down the price of eggs, but unless he can cure avian flu, he's not going to bring down the price of eggs. So those are the kind of things that we're dealing with now, that the Fed has a hard, it's sort of the last stuff, the last mile on inflation is hard to get through.
Yep. All right. Mike McKee, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Mike McKee, Bloomberg International Economics and Policy Correspondent. Let's get right to our next guest. Walter Mukunda has been kind enough to chat with us over the last several months. Give us his thoughts on what's happening down in Washington, D.C. He's a professor at the Yale School of Management. Gautam, thanks so much for joining us here. I know you listened to President Trump make some comments here. What are your initial thoughts here of these first several days of President Trump's second administration here as he hits the ground, seemingly running?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture. He's definitely hitting the ground running in some ways. So there's some element of the rhetorical gestures that don't kind of mean a lot and are characteristically Trumpian, right? He's renaming the Gulf of Mexico and the Mount Denali and things like that. Okay, fine. I mean, whatever. There are a bunch of executive orders, some of which are pretty standard, some of which are not necessarily what they seem. The one on tariffs, for example, basically says that the Secretary of Commerce will consult, which isn't the same thing as levying them massively. So we'll see what happens on that next. And then there's a bunch of stuff that is going to do a lot of long-term damage, but the effects may not be seen right away. The United States withdrawing from the World Health Organization. I think we had a pretty dramatic example quite recently about the importance of global public health. So, we might worry about the effects of that. The U.S. pulling out of climate change agreements. Those things are going to do a lot of harm, but it may not be perceptible in the next year or two, or even the next 4 or 5 years. It might be a problem for a successor.
Exactly, which brings me to my next question, and we were talking about this earlier, is what is the sequencing? Because that matters, right? If you have deregulation and you have tax cuts, that's obviously going to be positive. It feels like the equity market's really focused on that versus, say, the tariff issue, which could come actually earlier maybe than we think, but doesn't have a lot of clarity. What's your sequencing modeling?
So the sequencing a lot depends on the Republican Congress and the Republican caucus in the House, which at the moment is sitting on a 1-seat margin. Herding cats is easy compared to what they're going to try to do here. And in particular, the tax cuts, things like that, all that is also going to revolve around the debt ceiling increase, which will almost certainly need Democratic help. So there are going to be some significant tax cuts that will be slanted towards corporations, the wealthy. There's going to be massive deregulation in ways that will be very, very favorable to corporate interests. Like that is an inevitability with Trump. But the sequencing is completely up in the air and depends on, getting essentially every single Republican member of Congress to agree on a policy agenda. Good luck. I'd rather not. If somebody offered me that job, I wouldn't want to take it.
Gautam, one of the more near-term issues that needs to be addressed by the Trump administration is getting some of their cabinet nominees confirmed. They've made some major headway with Secretary Rubio, but still some contentious ones to come with Mr. Hegseth, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, to name 3. How do you expect this to play out?
Yeah, so Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski have said that they're not voting for Pete Hegseth. So we're basically down to they'd have to lose 2 more Republican senators. The most likely person to flip at this point is Mitch McConnell. After that, I don't really see a 4th. So my guess is he's going to get all of these people through. And that, in particular, you think about Hegseth, Gabbard to a lesser extent, but Kash Patel of the FBI. These are people for whom there is no argument that these are people who should be running these agencies, right? That there is no sense that they're qualified to do so. There is nothing in their background that makes it seem like they'll be successful. The idea that Pete Hegseth, who was fired for mismanagement at 2 different tiny nonprofits, is capable of running the largest bureaucracy on the face of the planet. If you said that and you actually cared about the qualifications, people would start laughing, right? Like the idea, it's just absurd. And so putting these people in seems a lot more about being willing to use the organs of the federal government for domestic political purposes, or even to go after Trump's enemies, than it is some sense that like Kash Patel, of all people on earth, is going to make the FBI a lean, mean crime-fighting machine.
Well, the counter argument is new blood. Maybe let's get some of the, get some new blood down in Washington, D.C., new ways of thinking.
So I really appreciate you saying that, because that is what both my first 2 books were about, right? The virtues of new blood and the advantages of bringing people in. So you will find no one on earth who's more positive about the ideas that you can bring in new thinking and make huge changes than me. I believe that. But right, not all changes are good. There's a famous thing, syllogism, politicians' logic. We must do something, this is something, therefore we must do this, right? And that's not right. There are many, many more ways to break an institution than to fix it. And if you look at the Pentagon, no institution needs massive reform more than the Pentagon. And if you needed to do that, you would ask, say, someone who had deep expertise in running a major procurement program, or someone who really understood the federal bureaucracy. You would not get someone who, essentially was fired for mismanagement from their last two jobs, right? If you were running, if Apple said they were going to replace Tim Cook with someone like that, you might say, well, Apple could use some fresh thinking, but I'm not sure that's where the fresh thinking is likely to come from.
Okay, well, fresh meat aside, Doge is obviously front and center too. We saw Vivek Ramaswamy leaving Doge to maybe go run for governor. The lawyer apparently is leaving Doge. She was there for 72 hours. What are you making of all of these headlines?
So the real thing that happened, and and it is a real distinction between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration, is the second one seems to be a lot more bureaucratically competent. And so what they essentially did was repurpose the Federal Digital Service, which was created in response to the Obamacare webpage fiasco, to improve the technical capabilities of the federal government. They repurposed that into Doge, which gives Doge access to essentially all of the non-classified information in the federal government, gives it in everywhere. It is a brilliant bureaucratic move, and it suggests that Doge may actually have a lot more impact on the government than we had originally thought it would when it first started looking like kind of essentially a committee that was going to issue a report. The problem there, again, is going back, is what we just saw, for example, is a communications freeze, for example, at NIH. So NIH has stopped reviewing all grants. They've stopped working with all scientists. NIH is the foundation for basically all biomedical research, not just in the United States, but really in the entire world. It spends $47.5 billion a year, and biomedical research in the world, things that we rely on to cure diseases, just doesn't happen without NIH. That kind of a freeze does real meaningful harm to scientific research for every day that it goes on. And it seems to have been issued quite capriciously without even any sort of explanation as to why we're doing this or how it makes sense. So that kind of thing is where, if Doge does things like that, I'd be pretty concerned as opposed to, optimistic, where massive federal government reform is long overdue.
Yep. All right, Gautam, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Gautam Mukunda, professor at the Yale School of Management. Let's get a little bit of a reset here. We'll go to John Tucker with a Bloomberg Business Flash, John.
All right, real quick here. Oracle is sponsoring this report. Oracle, attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, the offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. S&P 500, after setting a record yesterday, is right around there. Very little changed. It is up, down fractionally at 61.18. Dow Jones Industrial Average is 51 points lower. That is down 0.1%. Right now, the NASDAQ 100, 31 points lower. That is down about 0.1%. Volume a little lighter than usual for this time of day. As far as treasuries go right now, the two-year yield, after some of the data with consumer confidence this morning, 4 basis points lower, 424 right now. The 10-year yield, that is 3 basis points lower. That is at 461. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
Focus on Munis is brought to you by Build America Mutual. BAM Mutual insures municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit bambonds.com.
Bam. Oh,
Where's
yeah,
Matt
I was
Miller?
lame. Sorry about that.
Weak.
That was
Where's
bad.
Matt Miller?
That was bad. My bad.
Exactly. All right, we'd like our good friends at Build America Mutual. We're going to be seeing them soon, by the way, at their offices. Eric Kazatsky joins us, Senior Municipal Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. Eric, what's the Muni call for 2025? We've got a Republican in the White House. We've got Republicans in control of Congress. Did that change the way you and your market think about opportunity?
I don't think it changed the we're thinking about opportunity, right? Because that opportunity is really a subset of where rates are. And it's a great opportunity right now if you're looking for really high tax equivalent yields in an uncorrelated asset class. Munis are what you're looking for. As far as the tone in the marketplace, it's all over the place. And that's mostly because of what's going on with the new administration and how they're approaching these extensions to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Really the big unknown for us.
When do we think we get that clarity?
I wish I knew that answer. I would be a very rich person because everyone in my market is clamoring for that. We had a webinar yesterday. Most optimistically, we could expect some clarity in 2 months' time. Worst case scenario, you're looking towards the end of the year, but definitively something's going to have to be done before the clock strikes over to January 2026.
With rates higher here, the tax equivalent is pretty interesting for the municipal bond market. I mean, for my New Jersey bonds, I'm triple tax free. It's starting to get pretty interesting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, just look, if you're looking at, let's say, single A munis versus single A corporates on a tax equivalent yield basis, long end of the curve, you're picking up almost 300 basis points.
Wow.
We're at a statistical situation here where we're out of the norms that we'd normally see within the market. And I think everybody's normal inclination is to think higher rates, lower bond prices, not good. This is the opportunity set. This is the silver lining, which we've been pointing to. So, still a good time to sort of jump in. You're getting that coupon income for cheaper prices.
When you talk about, though, the lack of clarity when it comes to the tax exemption status, is that impacting the demand side or the supply side more right now, or both?
I mean, certainly not impacting the demand side. Flows were pretty robust this past week for mutual funds, which we really haven't seen a $2 billion inflow in a little while, right? Certainly not out of the norms, but it's mostly been in the SMA and ETF side. What I think is more interesting is that you're seeing sort of a call to action and a rush to market on the issuer side. We have about $12, $13 billion in the 30-day calendar. And from what we're hearing, there is a lot of sort of, drum beating going on from the bankers out to their clients saying like, hey, let's get ahead of this thing. We don't know what it is, but we want to sort of get out in front of it in case it doesn't go our way.
Talk to us, Eric, about the taxable municipal market, which, again, for a lot of folks is probably an oxymoron.
And I was going to say, why would you do that?
Eric, why would you do a taxable municipal bond if you're an issuer?
Well, a lot of the reasons to issue in the taxable muni market. One, you open yourself up to a larger pool of investors, which is always a good thing, right? More investors, more liquidity. And we saw a lot of benefit to that to some of the big names in our market, like Harvard, like California State Geo, some of the bigger names in both the, local government and state government space and also the private sector as well. So there is a benefit. You're unshackled by a lot of sort of the constraints you get by issuing in the exempt market. So another dual benefit there. But unfortunately, we are a victim of where rates are, and there hasn't been a lot of new issuance. So what that's really mean is that, all the bonds that come up on the secondary and the taxable muni space have been extremely well bid, and spreads have gotten a lot tighter. So the opportunity that we saw there, I would say in the early years of the pandemic, 21, 22, really sort of, we're not seeing it as beneficial right now. If you're looking for dollar-denominated, risk assets and fixed income, still a good place to be. You just might find a little bit more yield in corporates.
What have we noticed that the impact is on the muni market for LA right now and California at large because of the wildfires?
Yeah, I mean, certainly has been a knock-on effect. We've seen some selling come from overseas on the taxable side for the California state GOs. People just, they have an aversion to headline risk. It's completely understandable. And it could be client-driven. It could just be, portfolio management-driven in general, but an aversion nonetheless. We saw spreads widen for LA Department Power and Water, which makes a lot of sense given the sort of, totality of the damage. We don't know the cause. But if you sort of look at where spreads were, let's say the end of last year versus now, LA Department of Water and Power was trading close to a spread of 0, right? And in a way, it makes sense because taxes are so high in California that there was a premium being paid to get good quality paper. But then you have a situation like this where a new risk is reintroduced to the market, not an unknown, but sort of like, forced into the mainstream. And you've seen spreads widen out to about 60, 70 basis points. Do we think it will remain there? Absent of them being found liable for the fires, no, it probably settles a little bit below that. I really don't see us returning to the 0 days, though.
Eric, thanks so much for joining us. Eric Kazatsky, he's a senior municipal strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us via Zoom here, talking about the muni space here. Pretty much the muni performance year to date, like a lot of the fixed incomes, pretty much unchanged. Not a lot of movement yet year to date, despite the fact we've had the equity markets pull up about 4%, higher, 4% higher so far year to date. What are you looking at these days?
Well, I'm looking at maybe that 9% tax-free muni
Yes.
yield market. But anyway, I'm clearly looking at energy. I'm looking at what policies are going to wind up coming down. John Tucker's laughing at me, but
9%. What is that, like for a monorail?
Okay, someone was on set. I was like, who was on set the other day for TV and said that 9%? And I was like, sold.
Yes.
Okay. But I'm also looking at energy. I just feel like every single time Trump speaks now, he speaks about energy. So that's going to be super interesting.
So are your sources down in the energy world, or do they take this as real? Like there's real change coming? Like if I want to drill, maybe I can get a permit easier if I want to?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Particularly if you're in the LNG market. Venture Global is going public today. We're waiting for it to start trading.
Oh, Venture Global.
It would be about a $60 billion company, which an LNG exporter, one of the biggest energy IPOs ever. It would be huge. We're going to have the CEO on later today on TV at 3:30. Nice. It's coincidence that they're IPOing this week, but didn't hurt that Trump lifted the ban on LNG exports to non-free trade agreement partners. And that's going to be a huge part of maybe the Ukraine war ending. It's going to be a huge part of helping Europe. Anyway, I digress. Coming up, we'll talk about DEI in the CEO and the C-suite and how to manage that. This is Bloomberg.
Situation, but we're going to work together with the governor. We're going to work together with the senators, but really we're going to work a lot with your congressmen, especially the three that are in the area, and Michael Waitlist. And I'd like to put Michael in charge of making sure everything goes well. And Franklin Graham has been unbelievable. We've made a big contribution to Franklin, and we'll continue to do so. But I've been hearing nothing but praise for the job that Samaritan's Purse has done with Franklin, and we appreciate it. Where is Franklin? He's around here someplace. And that good-looking guy, he's always been a good-looking guy. His father was a good-looking guy, too, I'll tell you. We loved his father, right? I saw his father in the latter years, and I said, well, he doesn't have long to go. He was having a hard time, and he lived about 3 or 4 years after that. He was, they say it was good stock. He had the ultimate good stock. But I want to thank you, Franklin. You've been fantastic here, and everywhere he goes, he's always the first one I see. People don't realize it, how good it is. A lot of people, they go, well, maybe it's for the people that he's got, and you guys know because you're here, but the people that he's got have done amazing work. So I just want to thank everybody. We're going to get over and take a look. We'll say a few words. I do want to introduce some of the people that we have. And our First Lady, we'll start with our First Lady. She wanted to be here because of North Carolina. And then I said, well, you can do that, but you're going to have to come to California, too. And she said, that's okay. And we got to fix that one up, too. You ever see anything like that one? It's, who would have thought that could have happened? So, Governor Josh Stein, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to have a very long and good relationship. Representatives, maybe stand up if you would so the press can see. Representatives Chuck Edwards. Chuck, thank you. Thank you, Chuck. Tim Moore. Virginia, you know Virginia Fox, a legend. She is such a powerful woman. Pat Harrigan, Pat. Thank you very much. Your Agriculture Commissioner, who I hear is excellent, Steve Troxler. Steve, thank you very much. Good job, Steve. You got plenty to do, right? Huh? More than you ever thought. North Carolina Speaker Dustin Hall. Thank you, Dustin. Thanks, Dustin. Very good. House Majority Leader Brendan Jones. Brendan, thank you very much. We're making progress, Brendan. State Representatives Dudley Green, Carl Gillespie. Thank you very much, fellas. Good. Good. Thank you very much. State Senators Kevin Corbin, Warren Daniel. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin, Warren. And County Commissioner Jennifer Best. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. So Hurricane Helene was one of the worst natural disasters in American history. It was far worse than it was even billed. I have never seen such water damage. It was largely water damage, wind damage, but water damage nobody's ever seen. I've been here, as you know, numerous times, but now I'm here in a position where we can do something, meaning I've been in office for 4 days. And I wanted to come sooner, but actually they had a little problem with...
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence on Bloomberg Radio. We're listening to the comments by President Trump. He's in Asheville, North Carolina, addressing responders there. Let's go back to Asheville, North Carolina.
Have lost their lives. Is that now a fairly firm number, or are they still finding people? You know, what do you think? They're still finding people? Pretty much okay? It's a lot of people. 104 people lost their lives. 73,000 homes were severely damaged or destroyed. And I'll tell you, I've been to a lot of them, and this was like lots of hurricanes in one. I've never seen such damage done by water. And the water came, it was violent, and it left, and there was like nothing left. It's really pretty amazing. At one point, half of the emergency calls to FEMA went unanswered. That's real bad. FEMA was not doing their job. The city of Asheville went without running water for 2 months. A whistleblower testified that some FEMA employees refused to help people who displayed Trump signs on their properties. I think that's true, isn't it? I read that. It's not nice. That's not too nice, is it? But whoever those property people were, thank you very much. Michael, is that true? That's not good, huh? About the property owners you put a Trump sign on and they wouldn't help? FEMA. Earlier this year, FEMA kicked 2,000 North Carolinians out of their temporary housing into below freezing temperatures. What was that all about? Is that, you know about that? What happened? Tell me.
We had an incompetent administration under Biden, and we had a disaster, and then we call it the disaster after the disaster. That was the FEMA response.
You've had nothing but disaster since then. It doesn't matter at this point. Biden did a bad job. Some residents still don't have hot water, drinking water, or anything else, and many of them don't have quarters. They don't have anything. They got a stipend for what they lost, and we're going to take care of it. This is totally unacceptable, and I'll be taking strong action to get North Carolina the support that you need to quickly recover and rebuild. We're working on it very hard, and I think if Michael Waitlist does half as good a job for North Carolina as he did for my campaign, we'll be very happy. Him and Laura were a very powerful team. So you think you can handle it, Michael? I don't know. I'm not sure, Michael. I think this is maybe in many ways easier, okay? Maybe easier. But you're going to lead the team. Do you want to say who the congressmen are that you want to appoint? Do you want to introduce them?
We have Virginia Fox, Chuck Edwards, and Tim Moore, whose districts encompass the area.
And they are the districts that were most severely impacted, right? You were affected then, Virginia?
Yes, lost my own five.
Really? No. I'll also be signing an executive order to begin the process of fundamentally reforming and overhauling FEMA, or maybe getting rid of FEMA. I think, frankly, FEMA is not good. I think when you have a problem like this, I think you want to go and, whether it's a Democrat or Republican governor, you want to use your state to fix it and not waste time calling FEMA, and then FEMA gets here and they don't know the area, they've never been to the area, and they want to give you rules that you've never heard about. They want to bring people that aren't as good as the people you already have. And FEMA's turned out to be a disaster. And you could go back a long way. You could go back to Louisiana. You could go back to some of the things that took place in Texas. It turns out to be the state that ends up doing the work. It just complicates it. I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away, and we pay directly. We pay a percentage to the state, but the state should fix this. If the state did this from the beginning, it would have been a lot better situation. I think you guys agree with that, right? So I just want to say that Asheville, I know it well. It's a great place, and we're going to have it be a great place again. That was the one that was most severely affected. But North Carolina is going to come back bigger, better, stronger than ever before. And you're going to be very thankful. And you've already seen, I know that it really began 4 days ago, but you've already seen more action than you have in the last 3 months. And we're going to get it together. We're informing the Army Corps of Engineers to get going because you have a lot of river breaks and a lot of areas that you're going to need some pretty big work. And they're on their way. They're going to be working much harder than they've been working in the past, and we're going to take care of it. Any questions from the press of any of the congressman, governor, anybody?
Sir, are you going to sign an executive order on FEMA, getting rid of it? Can you say more about signing an executive order to get rid of FEMA, please?
FEMA has been a very big disappointment. They cost a tremendous amount of money. It's very bureaucratic, and it's very slow. Other than that, we're very happy with them. Okay, and I think when there's a problem with the state, I think that problem should be taken care of by the state. That's what we have states for. They take care of problems. And a governor can handle something very quickly. You know, one of the things I've noticed, because I've been doing this for a while, and we had a pretty good FEMA, but I also noticed that when they come, they end up in arguments. They're fighting all the time over who does what. It's just not a good system. This system is so beautifully designed over 250 years approximately, you know, and we'll soon be celebrating the 250th year. It's going to be a very big celebration. But it's been designed very well, and we're going to leave it that way. When North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, when everybody knows the governor of Tennessee, I think, everybody? Do you know everybody here, pretty much? I never thought of it, but you're right over the ridge.
Right over the middle.
So you're here to help. That's great.
The people in this region, including Tennessee, the people of Appalachia, are grateful that you are here and that you haven't forgotten it. And that there are other disasters, but this one was enormous for both North Carolina and Tennessee. So thank you.
You know, I've seen a lot of disasters, and when I came here right after, the day after. And when I came here, I couldn't believe it, actually. I couldn't believe the damage. And I've seen a lot of them. This was more like a tornado than it was what we witnessed. So we're going to get it very much taken care of. Good job. That's nice that you came. And so you call it you're right over the ridge, right, Tennessee?
Over the ridge, yes.
I like Tennessee, too. Let's see, where did I get more votes, Tennessee or North Carolina? I hate to tell you, North Carolina, it was Tennessee.
There's one of the counties in this disaster that had 88% for you. So
88%, yeah. No, it's the people are just incredible people.
Yeah.
So, do you have any questions, press?
President, you talked about conditions being placed on aid to California, voter ID, and the like. Are there any conditions that you're going to put on aid to North Carolina?
We're going to do a lot for North Carolina. You know, they've been very slow. I don't know why it's been so bad. This has been one of the worst I've seen. Katrina, of course, you know, was something that obviously that was a long time ago. That was not good. But this has been very slow. I don't know if that was for political reasons because they lost the state. You know, Biden lost the state. Maybe he felt he doesn't care. Maybe there were other reasons. I don't know. But this has been very slow. By any standard, this has been very slow. And we're gonna make up for lost time.
No conditions you're going to push for aid.
Well, in California, I have a condition. In California, we want them to have voter ID so the people have a voice, because right now the people don't have a voice because you don't know who's voting, and it's very corrupt. And we also want them to release the water. If they released the water, they wouldn't have had a problem. If they released the water when I told them to, because I told them to do it 7 years ago, if they would have done it, you wouldn't have had the problem that you had. You might not have even had a fire. So, but here I don't have that. It's a different thing. You got hit by a storm. The people are incredible. They worked really well. Franklin was fantastic, and other groups. By the way, other groups came in that were also fantastic. And other states came in. Tennessee and a couple of others came in, and they really helped. That's the way it's supposed to be. No, this is a different kind of a thing.
Mr. President, have you decided how much funding you would allocate for disaster relief?
About what?
Have you decided how much funding you would allocate for disaster relief?
I have to see what it is.
Mr. President?
Are you disappointed that Senator Schiff hasn't joined you on this trip? It's reported you invited Senator Schiff to join you on this trip and he was too busy. Are you disappointed?
I don't know. I was told that Schiff was going to travel with us to California. I wasn't thrilled, to be honest with you. And I saw him last night on television. It looks like he got hit with a baseball bat or something. What happened to him? Something happened to him. It looked like he got hit. It looked like he got beat around. But I'll ask Caroline to find out what happened to him. No, if he wanted to come out, I would have done that. But I don't know. Somebody said that he wanted to come on the plane, but I think he's staying back for the votes. There's some pretty good votes going on. Yeah.
Mr. President, what is your timeline for getting rid of FEMA?
For this one? For this one?
You just talked about possibly getting rid of FEMA. What timeline are you looking at, and how would you do that?
Well, we're looking here. Here you're talking about. To start, we're going to start immediately, timeline. And to finish, it's going to be a period of time. You know, people are also rebuilding their houses. How long does it take to build a house, right? It takes a time. And I want them to build houses bigger, better, nicer than they had before, so they can have, at least they get something out of this disaster. This was a real disaster. No, timeline will be fast. In terms of infrastructure, I think very fast. I want to thank Elon, because Elon was able to get us communication systems, as you know, Starlink. We had no communication. The first day I got here, I was asked by one of the people, one of the really great representatives, professionals, that is there any way you could get Starlink here, because they had no communication whatsoever. And I called up Elon Musk, and he had, you know, hundreds of units brought here, brought immediately. And it's hard to get. They couldn't get them before. And that made a lot of difference. I think it saved a lot of lives, actually. Yeah. Infrastructure-wise, we'll do it quickly.
Sir, can you just talk about how long you think it might take to get rid of FEMA? What's the timeline on that? If you're going to roll it back?
Yeah, I would say, look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not really thinking about FEMA right now here. I'm thinking about Michael Waitlist, and I'm thinking about the 3 Congress people that you just heard from, and also the other people in Congress, and they'll be working with the governor. They'll be working with the governor, so that's what I see.
Change the subject real quickly. The Laken-Riley Act was signed by Speaker Johnson yesterday.
Right.
When do you anticipate to sign that?
Well, we're honored by that. Laken-Riley, I was there at the time, and we had a big meeting with the parents right after that horrible thing took place. And we have an act. You all know what that act represents. And it was a bipartisan bill. Many Democrats signed onto it. That's something that is a tribute to Laken, a beautiful young lady who was killed viciously by an illegal alien. And we passed a very powerful bill, and it was just approved, and we'll have a ceremony sometime very shortly. I'll be signing it. In other words, if you're asking, I will definitely be signing it. Okay? Yeah.
Mr. President, the security detail for Anthony Fauci was terminated last night, and I'm wondering if you have any comment on that.
About what?
The security detail for Anthony Fauci was terminated last night, sir. Do you have a comment?
No, I think, you know, when you work for government, at some point your security detail comes off. And, you know, you can't have them forever. So I think it's very standard. If it would be for somebody else, you wouldn't be asking the question. The question is very fair. But, you know, you work for government. We took some off, other people too. But you can't have a security detail for the rest of your life because you work for government. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Would you feel partially responsible if something were to happen to, say, Dr. Fauci or John Bolton?
No. You know, they all made a lot of money. They can hire their own security, too. All the people you're talking about, they can go out. I can give them some good numbers of very good security people. They can hire their own security. They all made a lot of money. Fauci made a lot of money. They all did. So if they, you know, felt that strongly, I think that certainly I would not take responsibility.
North Carolina is a state that relies on trade and manufacturing. Are you going to have an announcement on new tariffs coming soon? Is there a timeline now?
Yeah, the tariffs are going to make our country rich. We're going to be a rich, rich country very soon. Tariffs are going to make it rich, and competence. We have common sense, competence, and tariffs. The word tariff is one of the most beautiful words in the dictionary.
Now, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary of the United Kingdom, said that there's an even trade between the U.S. and the UK, so they shouldn't have tariffs. Does trade imbalances or a balanced trade affect tariffs and your decisions?
Yeah, unbalanced and balance, and also deficits. Like with Canada, we lose $200 billion a year with Canada. That's because we allow them to make cars. We allow them to take lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their food products because we make the same products right on the other side of the border. It's sort of crazy. So we've just allowed that, bad management has allowed it over the last 4 years in particular to become very imbalanced. And I said I call him Governor Trudeau, but he's Prime Minister Trudeau when he was Prime Minister. I asked him, why would we do that? Why? And he was unable to give me an answer. He said, I don't know. And I said, do you think it's fair that we're paying $200 billion to keep Canada going? And what would happen, I asked him, what would happen if we didn't do that, if we didn't subsidize Canada? He said, we'd be a failed nation. And I said, then you should be a state. Because why are we paying all of that money to Canada when, we could use it ourselves, right? So we take care of their military. We're going to order about 40 Coast Guard big icebreakers, big ones. And all of a sudden, Canada wants a piece of the deal. I say, why are we doing that? I mean, I like doing that if they're a state, but I don't like doing that if they're a nation. Also, they've been very nasty to us on trade. Historically, Canada has been very, very bad to us, very unfair to us on trade. So we'll see how it all works out. I would love to see Canada be the 51st state. The Canadian citizens, if that happened, would get a very big tax cut, tremendous tax cut, because they're very highly taxed. And you wouldn't have to worry about military. You wouldn't have to worry about many of the things. You'd have better health coverage. You'd have much better health coverage. So I think the people of Canada would like it, if it's explained. But just to start off, they'd have a massive tax cut. And they'd have a lot more business because then we'd let business go to Canada routinely and there'd be no tariffs. If we did that, there'd be no tariffs.
Well, the United Kingdom might be in a better spot then.
Reverend Franklin Graham has been a great asset to the state. Talk a little bit about the way Samaritan Purse has helped North Carolina.
Yeah, say once again, the first
Reverend Franklin Graham has been a big part of Samaritan Purse and their aid to North Carolina. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Franklin Graham has been a big asset to the state. His father was a big asset to the state, to the country, both of them. I just think this. I think Franklin and other people that are doing what Franklin have done, but I've known Franklin so long. He was at the inauguration. He made a speech, beautiful prayer. He does a great job. And we made a big donation, and it was money well spent. Sometimes you make donations, it's not well spent. He's done a great job here. He's done a really great job. So I want to thank you. We're going to the site now, and one of the sites, and for those that haven't seen it, you won't even believe it, but not enough work was done. We'll get it done fast. And I can speak for the Republican congressman. We're going to knock it out, right? We're going to knock it out. And I think we take it very personally because North Carolina was very unfairly treated. Very, very unfairly treated. And it was obvious. It was too obvious. And we're going to make up for lost time. So thank you to the people of North Carolina. Thank you, everybody.
There you have it from President Donald Trump leaving the bubble for the first time since being sworn in on Monday. Of course, arriving in North Carolina, if that wasn't clear to you a short time ago, on what's going to be a bit of a day-long journey for Donald Trump across the country. He will not be back in Washington for some time, going through North Carolina to tour storm-damaged areas. This, of course, brings us back several months at this point now with the hurricanes that blew through the southeastern states. And we've talked a lot about some of the misinformation and the disinformation surrounding FEMA's response in North Carolina. President Trump echoing some of those untruths in that briefing that we just saw. He was greeted by reporters on the tarmac a little while ago in Asheville. He will go on to California next, and I want to bring in Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is tracking President Trump's travels today. Tyler, this is just the first stop.
Right, Joe. He's been touring this damage in North Carolina, and as you were mentioning, talking about some of his criticisms of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a few headlines crossing the terminal from his notes right there, saying that he would like to see an overhaul of that agency and also likely to direct funding away from that Federal Management Agency and instead over to the states so that they could help plan and prepare for disasters moving forward. How that would actually look like in practice remains to be seen. He suggested that he would sign an executive order, but as we know, those orders can only go so far. There could be legal scrutiny, so questions remain there. Although one thing that we should note is that in those comments, he took aim at the Biden administration's response in North Carolina. They've defended their response, most recent FEMA data showing us that $213 million were approved for more than 126,000 households in North Carolina. So while the Biden administration, also FEMA, has defended its response, important to say that FEMA often is asking for more money, more allocations to them, and that's something that could continue this debate.
Yeah, we're just getting started with the FEMA bit, apparently based on some of the language that we heard. And in California, you were reporting on this yesterday, this idea that there's a valve waiting to be turned in Northern California. That's clearly not the case, as we've described to our viewers and listeners, but there's a new condition he seems to be putting on here, and that's voter ID. We're going to hear more about that as a condition, I guess, for wildfire relief funding when he comes back to Washington.
Right, so this is something that is now mounting in Congress as we have to look at what federal aid would look like for California. President Trump has floated that he could withhold the aid, talking about this idea that you mentioned, that there's some sort of valve that could be turned to bring water down from the north. Now, California officials say that valve doesn't exist, and that's not really the problem here, really. Yeah. What they're investigating is more local infrastructure, but nothing to do with just an easy solution as the president has suggested. But this idea of conditioning aid either on unspecified policy changes, although we learned that might have to do with voter ID laws, or even tying it to the debt limit, something that has been floated here in Washington, is already starting to emerge as a political thorny issue for both sides of the aisle. I was catching up with one Republican congressional aide to Senate leadership who said that they are already starting to have conversations about optics here, particularly and what it would mean to perhaps politicize this issue to get it over the finish line. Joe, important to note that House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries for the Democratic Party's part told reporters yesterday that any of these provisions would be a non-starter.
Spending time with Tyler Kendall here on Balance of Power. If you're just joining us, it is high noon on the East Coast. This is typically when we meet. We got together a little bit early coming out of Donald Trump's first stop in North Carolina, his first trip outside of Washington since being sworn in. Some of the optics here, Tyler, are going to be fascinating, not just in North Carolina, but when he gets to California. Gavin Newsom, who he has continued to refer to as Newscum, is going to be on the tarmac, having been accused of not turning the valve that you referred to, or trying to save the Delta smelt instead of people. What is this? They wouldn't put people over fish, was the order that he put in place. Adam Schiff was also invited. Maybe not a surprise that he had to send regrets.
No, we were likely expecting that. Adam Schiff, in a statement from his office, saying that he cannot be taken away from Washington at this moment because there's some important things on the agenda, including voting for Trump's nominee picks. Now, as you mentioned, this long-standing feud between California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom and President Trump. Now, Gavin Newsom did tell reporters yesterday that he had extended this invitation a couple of weeks ago to President Trump when he was the president-elect, and that he actually hadn't heard from his team yet, that he learned through media reports that Trump was indeed coming, but that he will be there on the tarmac to greet them. Yep. Important to note that when we are talking about, though, federal aid and insurance and just the absolute devastation as these fires keep going on, the latest projections are telling us that this could be one of the costliest wildfires in U.S. history. The latest numbers from AccuWeather saying that this could be anywhere between $52 and $57 billion as many Americans struggle to find that funding and what's next for their homes.
Yeah, the insurance and reinsurance stories are going to be stark coming out of California. Tyler, thank you so much. Tyler Kendall on her way over to the White House, where we'll continue reporting today on Donald Trump's travels. We'll have much more for you. Governor Gavin Newsom, by the way, who I mentioned will be on the tarmac when Donald Trump arrives, issued a statement, quote, "We're making sure that all the resources he needs for a successful briefing are provided to him." Talking with reporters, he said there's no limit to the resources we'll provide for that briefing, so we'll keep tabs on that for you on this Friday. In Washington, D.C., we have the 52nd Annual March for Life happening this afternoon. Donald Trump will be addressing the folks near the Washington Monument by video. J.D. Vance, however, will be speaking in person. We've also got confirmations on the menu here with our eyes on the Senate, where it's going to be, it appears, a late working night. Pete Hegseth, if all things go as planned, at least at this moment, based on the count that we have, will likely be confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense. That could happen 8, 9 o'clock tonight. We'll keep tabs on that for you as we get into the late edition of Balance of Power. So we're just getting rolling here. Thanks for being with us on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. And before we bring in Wendy Benjaminson to talk a little bit more about what Donald Trump is up to, can you believe this is the same week he was inaugurated? We want to get to Wall Street, the Friday trade right now, live from New York. Charlie Pellet has the markets for us. Charlie?
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew, and here's what's going on. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're all trading lower. Equities, however, on track for the best start for a new U.S. president since Ronald Reagan was sworn into power in 1985. We're looking at a roughly 2% gain on the S&P 500 index on the week. Today, stocks lower. S&P down 3 at 61.15, holding close to a record, down less than 0.1%. The Dow now down 62, decline there of 0.1%. And NASDAQ down 33, a drop there of 0.2%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is higher, up by about 0.1%. 10-year 4.61%, the 2-year 4.24%. Spot gold up $17 the ounce, 27.72, up 0.6%. Crude 74.26 a barrel, down 0.5%. And Bitcoin is surging 2.6% at 105,800 on Bitcoin. President Trump has told Fox News he would, quote, rather not use tariffs against China, the world's second largest economy. Libby Cantrell is head of U.S. public policy at PIMCO. She told us, don't count your chickens just yet.
I mean, we think it's a little premature to start celebrating, and we think the direction of travel here is very clear. They did issue an America First trade memorandum that was basically a roadmap for how they are thinking about trade. It goes from everything from kind of rewriting free trade agreements to looking at currency relationships to looking at outbound investment from the U.S. to China.
PIMCO's Libby Cantrell interviewed on Bloomberg Surveillance. After earnings, Texas Instrument shares now down by 6.7%. After earnings, Verizon up 1.4%. Next week, we'll be hearing from AT&T and T-Mobile. Both of those companies are trading higher. And earnings this morning from American Express, the stock now down by 2.9%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you, sir. Happy Friday, and thanks for being with us here at the threshold of the weekend on the fastest show in politics. We've got a lot to talk about today. If you're just joining us, Donald Trump has left the bubble, stopping down in North Carolina just a short time ago, where he's surveying damage left by the hurricanes. Of course, Asheville, we've talked so much about. The reality changed by Hurricane Helene. And then it's on to California a little bit later on today. This will be in the evening hours, East Coast time. Gavin Newsom will be greeting Donald Trump on the tarmac in L.A. And, of course, he's going to be surveying damage from wildfires, which just moments ago in North Carolina, he again blamed on the valve, as he calls it, in Northern California, that he says is steering water into the Pacific. And he simply wants them to turn the water back on. As we've discussed on this program, it doesn't work that way. And efforts to save the 2-inch-long Delta smelt appear not to have much to do with what's happening with the response to these fires. The conversation around FEMA, though, is getting pretty interesting here. You remember everything said about FEMA in Asheville following the hurricanes, the mis- and disinformation. Flames are being fanned here on this trip, and Donald Trump suggesting FEMA shouldn't have much of a role in the future, that it should go to the states. Here's what he said on the tarmac.
Because FEMA just hasn't done the job. And we're looking at the whole concept of FEMA. I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me.
That's where we start our conversation now with Wendy Benjaminson in Washington. This is an interesting trip. Great to see you, by the way. I feel like it's been forever since you were on the broadcast. Yeah. And boy, I think last time we spoke, Joe Biden was still the president. So consider that was like 4 days ago. Look, the optics that surround a trip like this mean high stakes, right? Potential risk, potential high reward for Donald Trump. How's he starting out today in North Carolina? What are we talking about with FEMA here? I didn't realize until recently this was even a very controversial agency.
Right. Well, I mean, we've come a long way. I was just thinking about this since 20 years ago when George W. Bush put his arm around the FEMA administrator in New Orleans and said, heck of a job, Brownie. The trouble is, Brownie didn't do a heck of a job in 20 years ago, and FEMA has always been underfunded, has always had problems getting on the ground and doing everything they're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. So to that point, okay, maybe they didn't do enough in Asheville. Maybe they're not doing enough in California. Yeah. However, this idea that it can just go to the states, I think, is going to be met with a lot of resistance from both red state, Republican, and Democratic governors, because it is one of those, if you remember the term, unfunded mandates, where the federal government says, you guys take care of this, but we're not sending you any money to do it. A lot of Republican states have really, lowered their taxes, and they don't have the kind of revenue. So, in a state like California, which is rich, maybe, and what if a tornado hits Alabama? Mm-hmm. Are they really going to be able to restore themselves with only their budget? So that's the conundrum for Congress.
Well, so there are a couple of things at play here today when you consider the remarks from Donald Trump questioning FEMA, blaming the Biden administration for what he says was a no response, even though there was a robust response in North Carolina. We've been through that. Right. But now also conditioning aid. Yes. A couple of days ago, it was the debt limit. We could put that together with maybe California wildfire relief. Now it's voter ID, he says. This seemed to just jump out of the gates this morning, that California gets voter ID, then they get the money. Is that how it's going to go?
Who knows? Because as you said, the goalpost keeps changing. What struck me in that moment, what that was interesting, was a reporter in Asheville said to the president, are you going to condition the aid to North Carolina? Yeah. And he didn't answer, but he said, well, the people of North Carolina have been through so much. Mm-hmm. Yes, they have. They've been through horrors, but so have the people of California. And apparently there is no talk of conditioning aid. He was even being told at this briefing how many people in affected counties in North Carolina voted for him. Mm-hmm. So, is the question, are you loyal to Donald Trump, or is the question, did your home burn to the ground or get destroyed by a waterfall?
From our reporter on the ground, by the way, next stop, about 20 minutes away, they're driving. He will speak and also meet with families. It'll be outside. They have a podium set up. It's likely that we'll hear from the president again in North Carolina during the broadcast. It's going to be in front of an RV. Consider the optics, as I mentioned. The RV parked next to a washed out house. It's going to look like North Carolina has had no help.
Yeah.
What are the optics that he's seeking here?
Those are the optics that he's seeking, that these are people who are suffering, that these are Trump voters who have been suffering, and he, I guess this is him being consoler in chief, because if he's saying the federal government's going to leave you on your own, then I don't know exactly what he's going to say. This house is going to be rebuilt, either through private insurance or whatever. Of course, he can't just wipe out a federal agency with the stroke of a pen, no matter how much Elon Musk might really want to do that. Mm-hmm. I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe it takes an act of Congress. Yeah. So that would mean...
much like creating one.
Much like creating one. I
suppose, yes.
So, he's going to have to figure out some way to get Congress from states that are all being hit by natural disasters as the climate changes. Mm-hmm. that at least tries to help.
You know, we talked about Joe Biden as consoler-in-chief all the time. That's what he was said to be good at. He would tend to show up with the First Lady. By the way, Melania Trump is with him today. That's important,
she doesn't
right?
usually do that.
You can't meet with the families, I'm assuming, without the First Lady joining you, or at least that's probably the drive here. I've heard more references to paper towels today than I have since he went to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
He knows what people are talking about here. Does that affect his posture in dealing with people, talking to reporters?
I think it does, and I think we're seeing it today. He has not been overly glib. He has not been. I mean, Senator Adam Schiff, who was invited to go with him, but he was a leader of the resistance, in the first term. He chose, for scheduling conflicts, not to go. Yeah, he's got too many. He's got to wash his hair. He can't go to California with the president. I mean, and I think, Schiff is politically smart not to join him on that trip for his own political purposes. But yeah,
he called him scum from the Oval Office this week.
Yeah.
That's not the...
Right, and so he's deciding not
Gavin
to do
Newsom,
that.
a different story, though. He will be on the tarmac, even though Donald Trump calls him scum and has blamed him for the fires.
Right, but as
what's at work there, though? Gavin Newsom doesn't want to be seen as an obstructionist, obviously. Can they work together?
I think they might try. I think when all the cameras are off and you're talking about the second largest city in the United States being devastated by this, I think the two of them will probably work together. For a senator, it's less important. He can say, I'm not getting on the plane with you, go just do it. But the governor has to make sure that money comes to thing and that the president sees this and all that. So he will probably put aside any personal animus, any irritation. I guess Trump will put aside his irritation, perhaps, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what, when he gets out there. It'll be interesting to see if Trump also moderates his tone about California when he's in front of people, and including his own supporters like Mel Gibson and actors like that who lost their homes.
I forgot about the Hollywood ambassadors. How quick there's so much every day that, I guess Sylvester Stallone and
John Voight, I think.
Sure, John Voight. This is the part of the conversation where I asked Wendy to pull up to about 30,000 feet. Because this is one of those weeks that calls for it. As I just mentioned, Joe Biden was still the president on Monday morning.
Right.
So much has happened. People talk about the fire hose, the news cycle, flooding the zone. How would you describe this week and the ground that shifted under Washington's feet?
It's insane. I actually yesterday said something to a reporter in the newsroom. I said, "Oh, thanks for helping me out on Sunday with some story," and he goes, "Sunday wasn't that like a year ago?" I mean, the idea that it was 5 days ago just wasn't computing. I think we all are going to get used to this pace again. Trump will probably also begin to calm down and just get into governing after he does this. He wants to arrive.
Shock and awe this week.
Right, shock and awe. But I think we all have to get used to, and by we all, I don't mean journalists, I mean America, and the world has to get used to the fact that things are going to come out of left field at weird times.
That's right.
Biden ran a 9-to-5 presidency. And I think that, and we might have gotten something similar with Kamala Harris, but Trump operates on his own schedule, on his own time frame, often contradicting his press secretary while she's at the podium. We'll start to see that again.
Are we going to get briefings, by the way?
We are.
What do we know about this? Will there be daily briefings, or that's too old-fashioned?
I don't know about daily, but I know Caroline Leavitt, the new press secretary, has done a couple, I think, and she probably won't today because they're traveling. But I think she will do briefings. The trouble is that for her predecessor was that Trump would in those days tweet the opposite of what she was saying
and
at the briefing.
Reporters are reading that or he'll just waltz in the room and take over the briefing, which I suppose that'll happen from time to time around here. I find it interesting. Editors, news organizations, people writing op-eds, they say it's going to be different there. We're not taking the bait every time. Not every headline. We're not going to stop down. We're going to be discerning. And I'll tell you what, none of them have actually done it yet. This is going to take some getting used to.
It's just the first week.
To your point,
we'll get discerning soon.
That's why we have Bloomberg, though, because we don't do it quite the same way as the other networks. It's great to have you back, Wendy Benjaminson, with us live in Washington on the first week of Donald Trump's new presidency. Coming up, we're going to talk about some of the fallout from Donald Trump's actions this week, the executive orders when it comes to DEI, the federal workforce, and the potential impact on the private workforce, corporate America. Stay with us here. We have much more ahead on Bloomberg.
On Wall Street, we do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Equities lower across the board right now. Little change. That is the key takeaway on what will likely be an up week for the U.S. stock market, looking at a 2% gain on the week right now. Today, S&P lower by 1 point. Little change there, down less than 0.1%. The Dow is down 0.1%, down 50 points. Again, the S&P hovering close to a record. NASDAQ down 0.1%, lower now by 17 points. We've got the 10-year at 4.60%, the 2-year 4.24%, gold up $20 the ounce, up 0.7%, 27.74. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 74.22 a barrel, and Bitcoin now surging by 3%. It is up $3,100. Bitcoin back above 106,000, 106,259 on Bitcoin. Apple executive Kim Vorath, a company veteran known for fixing troubled products and bringing major projects to market, does have a new job, and that is whipping artificial intelligence and Siri into shape. Apple shares down by 0.3%. Meta Platform CEO Mark Zuckerberg says his company is going to invest between $60 and $65 billion in capital expenditures relating to AI this year, a number well above what analysts have been projecting. Meta Platforms up right now by 1.7%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet live at World Headquarters in New York with his hands on the markets as we talk politics here in Washington. It's the Friday edition of Balance of Power, and glad you're with us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Our live stream is up all day from Washington to New York and back again, and we always welcome you here in the studio to join us. On to Asheville today for Donald Trump. He has left the bubble, Air Force One, to Asheville. This is on the way to California. It's disaster day for the president. He spoke a short time ago, a briefing on the damage left behind from the hurricanes, realizing this a couple months ago now, and made some pretty controversial remarks about FEMA and in terms of California, about the valve we talked about, the Delta smelt. We'll hear a lot more about the poor smelt, I think, a little bit later on today. He'll get to California in the second half of the day. He will likely be speaking soon. As we mentioned, they've got a staging area set up for the president. A couple of folks are standing by, some families, an RV, what appears to be a damaged home, and they've got the podium and presidential seal set up for him. So we'll keep tabs throughout the day on his travel. By the way, this is what, day 4.5? A lot of people woke up this morning to try to remind themselves that it's been only a week, and it's been exacerbated by this uncertainty that has followed a lot. We talk about uncertainty in the markets, right? You can't plan for stuff when you don't know what the tariffs are going to be, the tax cuts. How does the Fed plan anything with the idea of incremental tariffs? There's just as much uncertainty for hiring managers right now as Donald Trump moves to reshape the federal workforce, and there could be echo effects in the private workforce. Remembering a couple of nights ago, we told you 5 p.m., DEI offices were shut down. People who worked in them were put on paid leave. By the close of business today, those managers are expected to put forth paper on how they're going to reduce the workforce. They will likely lose their jobs. That could be thousands of people, and it could impact programs far beyond the sort of nature that you think of with DEI, race and gender. As we've told you, this impacts veterans and rural services. So we've got a lot of confusion here as the world shifts under our feet a bit, which is something that we wanted to talk about with an expert. Amy Dufresne is the founder and CEO of a company called HR Standards Institute, HRSI. This is a credentialing teaching organization that's geared toward the HR world. She's with us now in studio. Amy, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Joe.
Your head's spinning, I'm guessing, with the rest of us here.
It
So
is.
if the world is shifting under your feet and you've got this kind of confusion, let's start with the federal workforce, because that's where the president is starting here. Talking about illegal diversity, equity, inclusion policies. This is something that's going to change the face potentially of the federal workforce. I don't know what the unions think about this. What do you think about it?
So this is really gray area that we're entering into right now, not only for the federal government, but for the private sector as well. We're seeing in the federal government not just the anti-DEI efforts, but the hiring freezes that are taking place right now. People are sort of struggling with what this means to them. We're seeing folks that are having their job offers rescinded, and those seasonal employees that come in to help the IRS process paperwork are, they're not going to have those seasonal employees based on what we're seeing right now. And there absolutely are concerns about these offices being shut down and these people losing their jobs around how does this impact unions and what does that mean?
Right.
Which is huge, and there are contracts in place, agreements in place. So what does that mean for those organizations? It also, when you think about all this, you think about the component of the morale of the people that are left behind. What does that look like for them? How are they going to navigate through this? And I think that when you think about, you talked about the jobs, those folks that are doing DEI, 60% of their roles was focused on DEI, but they had other parts of their jobs that were non-DEI focused. So what happens to that? Where do those functions of their responsibilities go? So, and when you talk about the private sector, you're looking at organizations that are shifting their DEI policy. This is not in the past 4.5 days, as you pointed out, but you're looking back for the past couple of months or past couple of years of what's been happening in the DEI space. Companies that have been pulling back on their DEI efforts, like John Deere, companies that have been reimagining what DEI looks like McDonald's, and companies that are really digging into DEI. Companies like JP Morgan, who Jamie Dimon this week talked about refocusing and doubling down on their DEI efforts because there is profitability in the bottom line for the bank for those efforts.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot here. You mentioned the unions. Why don't we start there? We haven't heard an outcry from federal labor unions. I suspect that they're trying to figure out the impact of this and what their next move is. Will that be the next call in response here from the unions?
I think that's going to be one of them.
Do they push back on the president?
I think they certainly will. I think they're trying to figure out the impact of the executive order that was signed on the 21st. They're really trying to understand what that looks like. I've been seeing and talking to attorneys in the employment space that are really also trying to understand how are we going to advise our clients on what this means from impacts on some of the federal laws that are out there. So for sure.
Remembering, federal government's the biggest employer in the country. And it's not just where you and I are sitting now in Washington. These are federal offices. Sometimes people need to be reminded all over the country, in every state. The echo effect, though, in corporate America is something that I find fascinating. And this hits close to home for you. You consider government contractors, for instance.
That's right.
But even beyond that, you said McDonald's, some of the other companies, Home Depot, where DEI pages are going away, different approach to business for fear of crossing the president. What's the motivation here?
Right. I think that I think companies are really looking at what's important to them in their culture and their values. I think that's what JP Morgan Chase is doing. That's what Costco is doing. They're really focusing on what are our values and what does that look like. And there will be some risks that these organizations may be facing by really doubling down on their efforts for DEI. But it's part of their bottom line. They're seeing results from that, and they want to reflect their customers. They are hearing from their customers that this is important. So all those things will continue to be focuses for the private employers.
The EO that I mentioned directs federal agencies as well to create a list of companies. It's like kind of a blacklist of companies to be targeted for potential investigations for what, again, is being called illegal DEI practices. Is this a labor story or is this a legal story? Because these companies have to lawyer up.
That's right. I think it's both. I think it is a story about labor, but I think it's also a legal story. And a lot of this is going to be litigated from both the private employers and for the federal government as they're focused on these long embedded laws and practices that companies have embedded in their cultures, federal contractors being one of them. I mean, they have redesigned and are redesigning their the contracts that they're putting in to service the federal government, and they're having to reimagine that. So this is a really, it's a challenging time to be in HR.
Yes, right.
HR is up for the challenge because HR has done a lot with the gray area out there, from COVID to return to work to machine learning and AI. And this is
so your phone's ringing, obviously. If it's time to consult an HR executive or department, we're going to go hire Amy and talk about this. Do you tell them to hold on because we don't know what's going on? Is it slow the roll? Because I don't think anybody has this. So we just had one order, for instance, on birthright citizenship overturned yesterday in court.
Right.
We could be in a completely different world 2 weeks from now.
That's right.
How do you make a plan for anything?
That's right. Well, I think, I've been talking to folks who are losing their jobs right now because they were doing DEI work for the federal government. So that's obviously happening right now. I think in the private sector, I think those organizations need to continue to focus on what's important for values and their culture. And, there's risk in all business decisions, right? So how are you going to make sure that you are doing the best for your organization and you have your shareholders and or your board behind what
Do we end up with two classes of companies? Those with DEI programs and those without?
I think we're already there.
Yeah.
And we have seen that.
That means some will hold the line, though.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think it's just what's important to their culture, right? What's important to them as a business and what they value, and where, there's a lot of research out there that shows that organizations that invest and have a diverse workforce, their bottom line profits are better. The proof is in the data.
Okay, so that brings us back to Wall Street then. You said the shareholders. Do shareholders consider this when they make investments? That's a long walk for some folks on Wall Street. How do you connect those dots?
That is. There have been pushes from the SEC on this. I think right now that's sort of off the table with this new administration, and looking at how do we value the human capital on a balance sheet? What does that look like? Because organizations have been saying on their publicly reported documents that they have a diverse workforce, but what does that mean? How is that defined? And I think some organizations have been really good at valuing that, and others have just made blanket statements about what that means and looks like. So I think this is the time for organizations to really dig deep and to look at their values and what's important to them.
So what's your time frame on when you have your arms around this? Is it first 100 days for you like everyone else?
Yeah, I think this is, a lot of this is going to get caught up in litigation, so it's going to be a lot longer than 100 days. But I think organizations are going to have to be paying really close attention to what the president is saying and what's coming out of this administration.
Great. I'm really glad you could come by. Let's do this again when we learn more.
That'd
it's
be
great to have the voice of experience in Amy Dufresne, HRSI, HR Standards Institute, for you to remember. Many thanks, Amy, for joining us as we stand by to hear from President Trump at his next stop in Asheville. You're getting a sense, if you're with us on YouTube, of what the optics will be here. We've got the RV parked with some family members. We're going to stick with this for some time here as Donald Trump makes his way through a couple of different stops here in Asheville. He's talking with the officials who are escorting him, and the First Lady, by the way. If you're looking at this shot on YouTube right now, the First Lady, Melania Trump, with the black hat and sunglasses, following Donald Trump through the cycle here. Not a big surprise to see the First Lady along for the ride here, as he will be meeting with family members starting right now. Our panel is with us, I'm glad to say. Our signature panel in Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. They're both going to be spending the day with us as well on Balance of Power here, the early and late editions, as we kind of go from the East Coast to the West Coast. Right now it is again North Carolina. Rick is partner at Stone Court Capital and Republican strategist. Jeannie is a Democratic analyst, of course, political science professor at Iona University. It's great to have you both with us. Rick Davis, the optics here are huge no matter the president or the party. High risk, high reward. What do you make of what we've seen so far from Donald Trump in North Carolina?
Well, I think he's really changing politics around these kinds of big disasters. Going after FEMA from the very get-go and talking about their failures. they're now part of his administration. I guess he's indicating that he's going to change the way they operate, and if not, maybe even shut them down. So, first of all, I mean, that's quite unusual. That's a first by any president I've ever watched, to actually undercut the agency that supplies aid to states and to the individuals who are affected by natural disasters and other kinds. The reality, too, is the permanent campaign continues. I mean, like this today, perfect campaign day. I mean, he's got the backdrop. He's got the folks who are echoing his message all around him. He's got his wife, the First Lady, with him. I mean, this could have been just another day on the campaign trail. And I think his sort of sensibility about how to use optics to drive his message is second to none. And so I think we can expect to see a lot of this kind of thing, and obviously even later today when he hits California.
Did have a campaign feel, Jeannie, the permanent campaign, as Rick says, when Donald Trump was briefed earlier, he appeared with local officials and the First Lady. He blamed President Biden for what went on in North Carolina. He blamed FEMA. He said nobody ever showed up. The people have suffered. And he started talking about California as well, blaming Gavin Newsom, who's going to be greeting him on the tarmac for literally turning the water off, he said, in Los Angeles. Donald Trump is approaching the stage here. He's kind of making his way slowly around this staging area to the podium. I think he's going to have some words with some of the folks there. But Jeannie, I'll apologize in advance if I interrupt you here. We're not exactly sure what the timing is on these remarks or what Donald Trump is going to seize on at this particular stop. But what do you make of the rhetoric that we're hearing, presidential versus campaign?
I think Rick is right when he uses the word politics in the context of all of this. And that is troubling, because what we heard the president say was that if you are a blue state, there will be strings attached conditions for any aid we give you. A red state, North Carolina, Tennessee, not so much. This is a repeat of what we saw in Donald Trump's first administration, and he's doing it again. And that is very troubling. Moreover, these strings attached are not strings on something that makes sense, like we are going to require that the state of California handle their fires differently, that they make changes to their environmental policies. What is the string attached? That he wants to make sure we have voter ID, a purely political string. And of course, he's not going to get that in California. And so I think this is something that we're going to have to watch. The president, Trump, owns these disasters. He can only blame other people for so long. And apparently the way he is going to proceed is people who voted Democrat or live in a state that voted Democratic, which is half the country, they will either not get the relief that they desperately need as a result of being victims of these things, or they are going to get it only if their state government adopts his way of operating in the political realm. It's a very, very divisive tactic, and it's not something I can think historically we have ever seen. Moreover, ask those Republican governors out there how this is going to play when they have disasters in their states that are purple or blue, what they're going to think of a policy of no aid for you if the vote wasn't what I wanted it to be. And we heard him say in that press conference, how many votes did I get here? No strings attached here. That's Donald Trump.
Yep, he said he won it 3 times. Jeannie, we are standing by, I should say, to hear from Donald Trump. If you're with us on YouTube, he's right next to the podium here, listening to Franklin Graham deliver some introductory remarks. The family members are there. Let's go live now. This is right outside Asheville, Swannanoa, North Carolina, on Bloomberg.
We've come to North Carolina with a simple message for all the people of this region who are hit so hard by Hurricane Helene, and that message is very simple. You are not forgotten any longer. You were treated very badly by the previous administration, and I'm here after a few days of the administration. We're going to California, Los Angeles. They got hit hard, as you know. A lot of that could have been prevented, I think, if they had water, which they had plenty of, but they didn't use it. But I'm going there, and it was set up to go there. They said, well, wait a minute, what about North Carolina? They said, well, what would you? I said, I have to stop there first. I'm stopping in North Carolina. So we made the stop, and I feel very good. You're represented by some great people, great congressmen are with us, and we're going to get involved with them. And Michael Waitlist is here, who is the head of the Republican Party. He worked with Laura Trump to take us through to a tremendous victory. One of the, as the media says, one of the most consequential presidential elections ever. They say in 129 years, whatever that may mean. But whatever it is, it was a great election we had, and we won your state. All 3 times we won your state. And all 3 primaries we won your state. So we won it 6 times, I guess, Mr. Congressman. And it's a great place. And I wanted to come here. And before I went anywhere, frankly, in the campaign, I promised that I'd come back to Western North Carolina to help the people of the state. And today, here I am to deliver on that promise. And we have a lot of things in mind. And we're getting the Army Corps of Engineers all set. You need your riverbanks fixed. You need a lot of roads fixed. And we're going to get it done in rapid time. And I've asked Susie Wiles and all of my people to start calling up, get the Corps ready, and they're going to get ready to go. I don't know what it is. I don't know what took so long for the other administration. But remember, I wasn't here for the first 4 months or 3 months, whatever it may be. See, we can only start as of essentially 1 or 2 days ago, and we've made a lot of progress over the last couple of days, Michael. I understand we're going to get you the resources you need and the support that you deserve, and we'll be at your side through every step of the rebuilding, and no American is going to be left behind. The people that I just met are so great, and the people that own that house is going to be very beautiful in a little while. And who knows, if Franklin decides, maybe he'll rip it down and build him a new one, because sometimes you can do that just as easily, but we're going to take care of the people. I want to thank our great First Lady for coming today. She really wanted to be here. She said, no, I want to go. And, you know, she sees what happened, and she felt very badly, and she wanted to go. And we're then going out together to Los Angeles, but she wanted to be in North Carolina. She saw what happened. She has a feeling like I do for North Carolina. So thanks as well to a great gentleman, Franklin Graham, and his father, Billy Graham. I used to go with my father to Yankee Stadium and places to watch his father preach. And he was some preacher. Where is you? He was some. You got good stock. You come from the ultimate genes, I can tell you. But he was really something. And Franklin, though, has done so much, and his father's looking down on him right now. I guarantee for a long time he's been looking down on Franklin, saying, I'm very proud of you, son. He really is, because what Franklin's done with Samaritan's Purse is incredible. They told me just yesterday that Samaritan's Purse has been great, but the FEMA people sort of left you high and dry, but we're going to change that around. We're not happy with FEMA. As well as all of the representatives. You have great representatives here. Chuck Edwards, who's here someplace. Where's Chuck? Where's Chuck? Chuck. Tim Moore. Tim, thank you, Tim. Great job, too. Both of you guys. Virginia Fox, a power. She's a power, that one. Don't ever have her as your enemy. It's not good. It's not healthy. Pat Harrigan. Good job, Pat. Addison McDowell. These guys were just here, just put in, and they're doing a fantastic job. Addison, thank you very much. Great. Mark Harris. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Brad Knott. Thank you, Brad. Greg Murphy, fantastic guy, my friend for a long time now, right? And the RNC chairman, Michael Waitlist, who really, as I said, brought us to a great victory with Laura, the chairman of the party, the whole Republican. I took Michael Waitlist from North Carolina because he did the best job and put him in charge of everything, and the job they did together was incredible. Last September, Hurricane Helene became one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern American history. Rainfall rose to far more than 30 inches, which is lethal, unleashing unprecedented devastation throughout western North Carolina and many other states, as you know, but you got hit the hardest. The highest responsibility and deepest obligation of the American government is to protect its people, and that's never truer than in times of emergency like this. Unfortunately, our government failed you, but it wasn't the Trump government. It was a government run by Biden. What a terrible situation. But our government failed the people of North Carolina in this horrible crisis. For 2 months, Asheville lacked running water, and even today, some North Carolinians can't take a hot water shower. They can't drink water. They don't know where to get it. It's delivered to them by some, or they just go out and somehow find some. It's been 4 months since the storm made landfill, and still 180 roads remain closed and in ruins. Earlier this month, the Biden administration kicked 2,000 displaced North Carolinians out of their temporary housing into freezing 20-degree weather. I don't know how they did that one, because it was cold, even while your government provided shelter and housing for illegal aliens from all over the world. But under the Trump administration, the days of betrayal and neglect are over. They are over. As I said in my inaugural address, we restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of the American government. And I think I said most of it in the inaugural address. We said a lot of things, but one of the groups of people I was thinking about is you in North Carolina. A lot of that was in reference to you and what you've had to suffer. I'm pleased to announce that under our leadership, the federal government will be surging housing solutions to the state that go beyond mere temporary hotel stays that ended up being very short term. The government wouldn't do it any longer, which is ridiculous. We'll marshal all available resources and bring back potable water and make your water and infrastructure dramatically more reliable very quickly. Today, I'll also be signing an executive order slashing all red tape and bureaucratic barriers and permits to ensure the rapid reconstruction of the roads here in western North Carolina. We're going to go through a permitting process that's called no permitting, just get it done. That's the way they built them many years ago, I guarantee you that, right? We will get them back very quickly, and we'll begin the work of fundamentally changing, terminating, or overhauling FEMA. FEMA's been a disaster, no matter where they are. We're honored to be joined today very quickly by several families affected by the vicious storm. I'd like to ask each of them to share their story. Chris and Kim West, you could come forward. Ramona Nix, Jackie Mitchell, and Thomas Gary Bright. And finally, the Wright family. And come on up and maybe say a few words, please. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hi.
Come on in here.
Whenever it started, we started moving.
All right, we're going to bring our panel back in as the family members now spend some time with Donald Trump. Wanted to bring you those remarks live from just outside Asheville. Donald Trump, if you're with us on the radio, standing in front of an RV in a kind of a broken home, a damaged home from Hurricane Helene, suggesting that the people of North Carolina were abandoned by the Biden administration, which is not something that we can report. Joe Biden himself did actually visit that area, but that was weeks after knowing that a presidential visit would disrupt the response. Weeks after FEMA showed up. FEMA is getting a pretty bad rap from Donald Trump right now. In fact, says he'll be signing an executive order to overhaul the agency. I want to bring back our signature panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, who are watching and listening along with us here. Rick, is this the end of FEMA?
You know, I think it's probably close to being the end of FEMA that we know, right? The structure and the traditions of work that they do are probably going to change dramatically based on what the president has said. You know, I think that the question is, are they going to take a run at actually closing it down and trying to create something different, direct aid to the states, something like that, block grants for emergencies? I don't know. There are a lot of things that are uniquely FEMA. I mean, the enormous amount of equipment and the ability for a federal response to bring assets both from the military and civilian areas, helicopters, bulldozers, you know, things that states on their own would have a difficult time accessing. So I think that debate is going to be interesting in Congress, depending upon how far he decides to push it.
That's for sure. A debate over the future of FEMA. Jeannie, as we discussed, a debate over the future of emergency funding that apparently will have strings attached, maybe in California, not in North Carolina. But look at the optics here. I don't know if we can bring up this video again for our viewers on YouTube. There it is, Jeannie. Look at this. Donald Trump at the podium. There's a dad in his Carhartt. He's holding his child. A couple of family members behind him. This is clearly a rural crowd, and they're in front of a damaged home. This is the type of optic that resonates. How come Joe Biden didn't do an event like this?
Well, Joe Biden did go down, but you're absolutely right. He should have been more present, and that is something that Donald Trump is very gifted at doing. I mean, you just look at it. It seems hard to believe it's only been 4 days since he was inaugurated. It seems like he's been everywhere in 4 days, and that is to his credit. And Joe Biden should have been. But the reality is, what we're seeing is the politicization of emergency relief and disaster relief, and that is troubling. There is no question that FEMA can be made more efficient, that it should be revitalized, that it can be reconstructed, that people are concerned about how bureaucratic, slow, all of those things are true. And Democrats cannot get into a position of defending that. By the same token, for a president of the United States to stand up and say, did you vote for me? Okay, there will be relief with no strings, but if you didn't, there's not going to be relief. He's going to go out to California and look at people in the eyes, many of whom voted Republican, many who voted Democrat, who are suffering enormously, lost their lives, lost their houses, death, destruction. And he's going to tell them that if they don't have their legislature pass voter ID, then they will not get relief from the federal government. That is politicization of our emergency relief system, and it is uncalled for. And that Democrats and Republicans shouldn't stand for. We can fix FEMA. We don't have to destroy it, or we can replace it with something better, but it shouldn't be politicized.
Is this the new normal, the strings attached? Rick, when it comes to emergency funding, there was a time when this would be kind of a bipartisan affair, put up a clean bill, but we're talking about either coupling California disaster relief with the debt limit or voter ID. Could Donald Trump normalize this in Washington?
You know, he's certainly pressing the envelope to a pretty close extreme. I mean, it's not clear to me that he's attached quid pro quos to future aid to California. He's obviously made statements today and previously about things he wants California to do differently. And maybe that's a conversation he has with Gavin Newsom, which would be appropriate. Obviously, if he's attaching changes in what the state does on these kinds of issues with the ability to get relief, that's a different topic and it'd be inappropriate. So I don't think being too hyperbolic right now around the need to help these states is going to be constructive. But at the end of the day, I think we are all left with sort of our heads scratching today, wondering, you know, is there going to be a blue state disaster response and a red state disaster response? And the only reason we're left with that is because of the rhetoric that the president has used today.
You had a hiring freeze among the federal workforce and some of the other executive orders that Donald Trump put forth this week. Jeannie, what does it mean for the administrator of FEMA trying to plan for future disasters?
Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult. And again, he is absolutely right. FEMA has problems. We know that. It can be improved. There's no question on that. What is concerning is that people expect their government to be there when they are victimized by a horrific disaster, their worst days, as Mike Cohen called them. The government should be there, and that should be true regardless of where you happen to live, blue or red state. So yes, fix FEMA. Yes, make it less bureaucratic, make it move more quickly. All of those things are true. But you don't pick winners and losers based on the states people happen to reside in at the time that they are impacted in these horrific ways. And that is troubling.
Keeping us honest, our signature panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our Democratic analyst and Republican strategist, who will be with us in hour 2. We have a lot more to talk about coming up. Tyler Kendall will join us from the White House with an update on the president's travel today. Gina McCarthy, the former White House National Climate Advisor, will also join. And what is a new day for her world? Much more ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Donald Trump lands in the disaster zone. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the president makes his first trip outside Washington since Monday's inauguration, visiting North Carolina to see damage left by hurricanes, and California, of course, damage left by wildfires, some of which are still burning. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Kaylee, based on what we're hearing from Donald Trump in North Carolina, the response and the funding to clean up from these disasters could be a little more complicated when he gets back to Washington.
Yeah, well, he did say more funding is coming, that they would be supplying it, though he didn't get into specifics around numbers he'd be requesting from Congress or what role, if any, states would have. What is interesting, though, is he also suggested states should be the ones taking over emergency response, that FEMA, which of course does it on a federal level, goes into the disaster zones when they're needed, needs to be overhauled, if not done away with outright.
That's true, and we could have a situation where North Carolina is in a different bag than California, where Donald Trump is now potentially tying relief in Washington to voter ID in the state. He had also suggested that it may be tied to the debt ceiling increase, Kaylee. So far, just rhetoric. We don't really know what this will end up meaning.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what the president says when he touches down in California. He's still in North Carolina for the time being. In fact, speaking at a news conference alongside families who were affected by Hurricane Helene. And if we hear more from President Trump while he's there in Swannanoa, North Carolina, we will bring you those remarks. But in the meantime, as always, we begin with a check on the markets. So let's go on up to Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kaylee Lyons. We are looking at a down Friday here, on track, however, for a winning week. This week, the S&P 500 index on track for a gain of just about 2%. But right now, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all trading lower. And yes, the Russell 2000 as well, now lower and little changed. S&P, to put it all in context, down 12, a drop there of 0.2%, holding close to a record, holding above 6,100, 6,106 on the S&P now. The Dow down 86, that is a drop of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down now by 69 points, a decline of 0.3%. And again, the Russell 2000 Index had been positive for much of the day, now lower by 1 point. The 10-year at 4.62%, with a 2-year 4.25%. Gold up $18 the ounce, up 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude lower, little change, 74.42 a barrel, down now by about 0.2%. Bitcoin now surging by 3.5%, 106,683 right now on Bitcoin. Bitcoin trading again close to $107,000. Earnings news: American Express profits increased 12% as well-heeled consumers spent more than analysts expected on their credit cards over the holidays. American Express shares trading lower, however, down by 2.2%. Verizon out with fourth quarter financial results that beat analyst estimates. Verizon up now by 1.3%. AT&T shares up by 0.6%, and rival T-Mobile up by 0.6%. Both T-Mobile and AT&T will be reporting earnings next week. So again, recapping, we're looking at a down Friday here. S&P down now by 0.2%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Here in Washington, we're, of course, rounding out the first work week for the 47th president. Donald Trump, having been inaugurated just on Monday, if you can believe that, has already left the district. Touring today disaster zones across both the East and West Coast. As we speak right now, he is in North Carolina in the Asheville area, where he's meeting with families affected by Hurricane Helene and promising greater aid. Talking about failures he thinks were indicative of the FEMA response in North Carolina. And when he's wrapped up here, Joe, he'll, of course, be heading to Los Angeles to view the damage from wildfires, which in some areas are still burning.
That's absolutely right. With a new fire that broke out just a couple of days ago here, Donald Trump will be in North Carolina for a couple of hours, as we heard remarks earlier when he was briefed, meeting with family members now. And he won't be home for some time, Kaylee. Once he goes through California, he's going to be on to Nevada, spending the night there for a rally in Las Vegas tomorrow. So this is how Donald Trump is wrapping his first week back in the White House here. criticizing FEMA, calling for its overhaul, Kayleigh, and in the case of his first stop in North Carolina, blaming Joe Biden for what he calls the lack of response. We want to go to the White House for more right now on what Donald Trump has planned. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us from a chilly North Lawn. Tyler?
Well, Joe, this is President Trump's first trip since taking the White House. And as you mentioned, he's been meeting with families and also touring damage in North Carolina. He started his remarks to those families saying, quote, "You are not forgotten," as you were saying, criticizing the Biden administration, which has largely defended its response. Now, President Trump spoke numerous times this morning talking to the press, notably renewing his criticism against the Federal Emergency Management Agency, even telling reporters earlier today that he has plans to overhaul how FEMA is run altogether.
Probably less FEMA, because FEMA just hasn't done the job. And we're looking at the whole concept of FEMA. I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me.
Now, FEMA has defended its response to natural disasters, including in North Carolina, though worth noting that former administrators often have asked for more resources and funding. President Trump has signaled that he will sign an executive order to overhaul FEMA. He suggested that that will include deregulating the agency and also surging housing resources. But what it will actually look like when it comes to fruition remains to be seen. When pressed on whether or not it could include eliminating the agency, President Trump declined to provide further details. Joe and Kayleigh, this week, the Trump administration did appoint an acting head to FEMA. Cameron Hamilton launched an unsuccessful bid for Congress last year. He has yet to make any public statements about what the future of the agency might look like.
Well, when we consider the future here, Tyler, knowing that in Donald Trump's immediate future, he'll be traveling from North Carolina to Los Angeles, he also spoke today about potential conditions around aid for those affected by wildfires.
Right, and when we look at the potential cost that those wildfires might cost, the latest projections are showing us that it will likely be one of the costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. The latest data from AccuWeather projecting that the economic loss could be anywhere between $52 and $57 billion. Now, this idea of conditioning aid, whether tied to unspecified policy decisions, President Trump had floated potentially tying this to voter registration in Los Angeles, or even tying it to the debt ceiling, something that has come up here in Washington, is already proving to be a politically thorny issue. I caught up with one Republican congressional aide to Senate leadership who said that they are trying to map a way forward here on how to tackle this issue, considering that it has such far-reaching impacts and could set potentially a precedent for more natural disaster aid down the line. Ultimately, they said that they think that this will get done, but important to note, it's not going to necessarily be easy. Joe and Kayleigh, yesterday, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries told reporters that any such provisions attached to the aid would be a non-starter for his party.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the White House. Thank you so much. Meantime, Donald Trump has taken the podium once again in Swannanoa, North Carolina. Let's listen to his words.
Yes, I was thinking about other things, wasn't he? But they weren't told what they did, what the past administration did to North Carolina is a disgrace. So I just want to wish you all well. I was here right after the event, and I couldn't believe it. I have never seen anything like it. I've seen a lot of bad things, but I've never seen anything like it. And it's an honor to meet the people behind me, and it's an honor to be with our congressional delegation and some of the other politicians in the area. And it's an honor to have Michael Waitlist at my side, because maybe we wouldn't be standing here as president if he wasn't. Him and Laura Trump were unbelievable as the head of the Republican Party. So he happens to come from a place called North Carolina. So I said, Michael, fix it. So good luck. Good luck. And we'll supply what you need. You know that. Okay? Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Heartbreaking story. There's been so many local groups stepped up to assist these families.
That's one of the things you hear.
Any talk on having money instead of going to FEMA and going through the bureaucracy to go to them?
That's what I want to do. We want to bring it locally so that a state takes care of its problem, and then they can bring it down to a local level, like Samaritan's Purse and Franklin, because that's one of the better examples but you had numbers of people that did a great job. You have groups that did a great job and organizations. The one that didn't do a good job was the government. They did a bad job. They did, in many ways, they did no job. They weren't even available. So, good question. The answer is we go local. I think it'll work much better. FEMA is a very expensive organization that really doesn't work out very well. It hasn't. This is not the only example. So it was up to me right now. It ended right now, and I just let the state take care of the problem. I mean, you can always have problems. Let the state. If it's Florida, it's a hurricane. Let Florida take care of it. They don't need FEMA to come in. Yeah. Yeah, I envision a very important role for him. It's any role he wants. He's a very capable guy, Michael Waitlist, a very capable guy, and he's friends and works with these guys, keeps them elected, right? They have to do a good job. Otherwise, no matter how good Michael is, not going to work. But they've done an amazing job. They've been great. You're lucky you have great congressmen here, and woman, by the way, a great woman, very powerful woman. They're going to do a great job. They'll do it together. They'll work together, and we'll supply what they need as they need it. We'll coordinate that, and we will immediately get the Army Corps, Michael, because you need roads built. You know, we're talking about the bridge. We're talking about roads and things. So we got to get them built, all right? Okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
All right, we just heard from President Donald Trump on his visit to North Carolina alongside families affected by Hurricane Helene. Once again, talking about FEMA, Federal Emergency Response, of course, suggesting that if it were up to him, it would be eliminated entirely. As we'd already heard him say earlier today, he thinks this should be up to the states. It is unclear, though, Joe, how exactly that would work, considering states don't have the kind of emergency personnel readily available, which is a lot of what FEMA provides, let alone questions around resources for emergency response. And once again, of course, we heard him criticizing what FEMA did during the Biden administration in response to Hurricane Helene, although he has repeated some misinformation about what was and was not available during that immediate aftermath.
That's correct, including the fact that Joe Biden did visit North Carolina. Donald Trump said he did not, and we know that there were thousands of FEMA workers who were staying up all night working in extremely dangerous conditions following those storms in North Carolina, the Asheville area, western North Carolina, into the hills. Is something we talked about for weeks, Kaylee. There was an enormous amount of misinformation online that actually led to some FEMA workers being attacked or being blocked from getting into areas where they were trying to help people. Donald Trump leaving this particular stop in North Carolina. They're going to continue on, and we'll be following his travels throughout the day, not only in North Carolina, but also in California, where, Kaylee, the matter of climate is something that's been talked about a lot with regard to these wildfires, as Donald Trump blames a valve that he says exists somewhere in Northern California that he says Gavin Newsom used to turn the water off in L.A.
And of course, authorities in California deny the existence of such a valve. There is no factual evidence that that is what has happened here. By and large, authorities say this is an infrastructure problem and that the municipal infrastructure in and around Los Angeles simply was not designed to have the kind of water flow and pressure to fight fires with hurricane force winds, the Santa Ana winds essentially blowing them around. It was just a hard thing to fight. All of it, though, to your point, though, whether it's the hurricanes in North Carolina in mountainous regions that usually aren't experiencing the impact to as great a degree to wildfires like what we're seeing take place now on the West Coast, all of it does speak to climate-oriented events that the U.S. finds itself having to respond to. So on that note, we turn now to Gina McCarthy. She's former White House National Climate Advisor and also former administrator of the EPA. Gina, welcome back to Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We appreciate your time. As we consider these events on both the East and West Coast, is the common denominator here a changing climate with no sign that we should not anticipate events of this scale and potentially as damaging as we have seen in the future?
Well, first of all, thanks for letting me be here. And absolutely, what you're seeing here, both in North Carolina and California, are climate impacts. what you're seeing here is the threat to people everywhere. And I have to say that after listening to some of the remarks by the president, I'm not sure I'd feel better and more confident about the federal government jumping in and making sure when we see climate disasters like this, we aren't running towards folks, making sure that they can get the safety and security that they need. So my hope is that over time, the president will learn that FEMA is a great agency. It stepped in North Carolina. Everybody is on board to fight the fires in Los Angeles. So before we make any of these issues political, we ought to make sure that we're protecting people and communities first.
Donald Trump's going to touch down in California a little bit later on. We understand that Gavin Newsom will meet him on the tarmac, having been blamed by Donald Trump for these fires. I just wondered if you could speak to the situation involving, we've heard a lot about the valve and the Delta smelt from Donald Trump. Tell us, in your view, why Los Angeles is burning and why these fires have been so hard to fight.
Well, we've seen, as you indicated earlier, we've seen some tremendous wind, 100-mile-an-hour winds. We're seeing a basically 2 months of literally no rain in Southern California. We're seeing challenges that we've never seen before in terms of the drought that's hitting that area, which means it was a tinderbox. It was ready to go. Mm-hmm. And with those fires, it's been carrying it and fueling it consistently and now refueling it again. So we have to recognize that this is, not about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing that in the challenge of climate change, you're going to see these kind of disasters hitting because the weather's not the same anymore. We are talking about impacts that we need to face and respond to and be prepared for.
Well, and that response, in part, is mitigation and adaptation, right? Trying to work with a changing environment so that you can best avoid things like this to the extent that we can brace against Mother Nature, Gina. And I do wonder, as California is facing a lot of criticism, perhaps unwarranted, in some instances, it comes to things like water flow and supply and this valve and the Delta smelt, as Joe has referred to. But are there things California should have been doing from a mitigation aspect that, if we're talking about conditions on aid, maybe should be included in those conditions? How could it be handled better?
Yeah, well, we have seen fires consistently in this area, and I think California does its best to try to respond to this. But look, every community is at risk as a result of climate impacts. So we do have to work together, not pointing at fingers, but figuring out how we can continue to move forward in the face of a president that doesn't acknowledge that climate change exists. So I think it's really important that we move together, that we maintain our relationship with the international community, even though that the Paris Agreement has now been avoided again by President Trump. We are working with Mike Bloomberg and others to make sure that we still maintain a vital role internationally. But we also have to recognize that governors and mayors and business leaders and institutions all have to step up now. They know the challenges they're facing, and we have to make sure that we continue to invest in our communities in a way that's moving forward with clean energy and not making the climate worse by continuing to advance oil and gas, which is ultimately the main reason why we are having the climate challenges we're seeing today.
Gina, I want to ask you about some of the things that we've seen take place this week since Donald Trump took office. We saw a flurry of executive action starting, of course, on day one, as he promised. I'm looking at one of them right now called Unleashing American Energy. It's dated the 20th of January. This executive order disbands the interagency working group on the social cost of greenhouse gases that Joe Biden helped to establish in 2021. It excludes the work of this group as well, to this point, from government policy. What do you make of the reversals of some of the work that you were involved in the Biden administration, and what will be the impact?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember, and it's pretty clear that they're trying to reduce the impact of any of the efforts underway to address climate change and to move towards clean energy. But what's, I think, important for the American public to understand is that we have 750 plus clean energy projects moving forward in the United States now. We have already moved forward with 400,000 new clean energy jobs. The American people want clean energy. It's saving them money. It's keeping their air cleaner. It's keeping them safe and more secure. And remember, half of those projects are in Republican districts. So now we have Republican congressmen standing up saying, we don't want to dismantle all of the work that's been done before. So it's really important for us to remember, rather than continuing to fight about everything, let's look at what is already in our hands. The 84% of money that's already gone to cities and states, and our great America is All In colleagues, governors and mayors, who are gonna stand up and talk about the real things happening in the world and how we can continue to move forward on clean energy. Because that's the challenge that Donald Trump faces. Fossil fuels are expensive, clean energy is cheap. That's what the American people need to know and understand, so we can begin to get over the hump and work together to move forward to make our country work the way it's supposed to.
Well, and Gina, as you talk about the resources that are needed here, we should note, as you mentioned earlier, some of those resources have in fact come from Michael R. Bloomberg, who is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, which is the owner of this network. Before we let you go, Gina, obviously we all have our eyes on the Senate as a number of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees are teed up for confirmation votes. That includes Lee Zeldin, who he has tapped for your old job running the EPA. What would your advice to Mr. Zeldin be?
Well, I think my advice to him would be to take a deep breath when you get there. EPA is a terrific agency. Take a look at what they do from a science perspective. Get, an understanding of what's going on across the United States, where the environmental challenges are, and how he can work together, even within this administration, to make sure that he's laser focused on protecting the American public. After all, that is the EPA's role. We are there to protect our environment and our well-being and bring safer communities to the table. And I hope that he'll have the wherewithal to give it a little bit of time, understand that agency, and utilize them as some of the best, most professional scientists and policy people that any agency has in the United States or beyond.
With us from the paradise of Jamaica Plain, Gina McCarthy. It's great to see you, Gina. Thank you, and come back and see us soon here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Not just formerly EPA, former White House National Climate Advisor. Appreciate the insights today. We'll have more with our signature panel coming up after we get our hands around Wall Street. An update on the markets now in the Friday trade with Charlie Pellet, live in New York. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. And here's what's going on lower across the board right now. On track, however, for a winning week. On the week, S&P 500 looks set to close roughly 2% higher on the week. S&P right now holding close to a record 6106, lower now by 12, a decline of 0.2%. The Dow down 102, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 68, a decline there of 0.3%. The 10-year 4.62% with a 2-year yielding 4.26%. Gold up 0.6%, 27.72 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil right now down 0.3%, 74.43 a barrel. Bitcoin now surging 3.7%, closing in on $107,000. Meta Platform CEO Mark Zuckerberg says his company will invest between $60 and $65 billion in capital expenditures relating to AI in 2025. That is well above the number that analysts had been projecting. Meta Platforms, which reports next week, trading higher now by 2.2%. Again, recapping, S&P down 0.2%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much helping us out here as we round out the trading week and round out what has been an incredibly long week here in Washington. It, of course, began on Monday with the inauguration of Donald Trump, who is now ending his week on the move, right now as we speak. He's heading back to the airport in Asheville, North Carolina, where he'll take off for Los Angeles to view the damage from wildfires. He'll be spending his weekend traveling. You know who won't be traveling this weekend, though, Joe? Members of the United States Senate, who are going to be kept in town, we understand, to vote on Donald Trump's cabinet nominations. Beginning tonight, relatively late tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, the expected confirmation vote for Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, lawmakers in the House left town, even though they're apparently the leadership wanted them to hang out for the March for Life, which is something else that's taking place today in Washington as we speak. This is an annual, 52nd as a matter of fact, but senators have no choice. They could be voting for Pete Hegseth around 9 or 10 o'clock tonight, depending on how things go, and it looks like they could roll straight through the weekend. Remembering, John Thune wants everybody in 5 days a week.
Yep.
No days off.
He's playing hardball with the schedule.
Fridays in the Senate? Is nothing sacred? We reassembled our panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. He is, of course, Republican strategist, partner Stone Court Capital. She's Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. Rick, you spent enough time in the Senate to know how outrageous this whole idea must be. But in all seriousness, Pete Hegseth looks to have the votes. Will he be defense secretary by the end of the day?
Yeah, he very well could be, certainly by midnight. You know, there was a test vote yesterday that, called cloture on his nomination to bring to the floor, and he lost 2 Republicans. He can lose one more and still become secretary, but if he loses another 4th vote, that ends his nomination. And it is interesting. I mean, Donald Trump today has said repeatedly that he wasn't counting on Mitch McConnell to vote for Hegseth, although McConnell supported the cloture vote. So I don't know. I mean, it will be interesting to see if they have to use the vice president to break a tie if Mitch McConnell joins Collins and Murkowski in opposing Hegseth.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about here, right? JD in the motorcade.
Yeah, having to cast a tie-breaking vote, knowing that the others we were watching, Senators Young and Ernst, Joni Ernst, of course, the female combat veteran who now represents Iowa in the Senate, having said they're still standing by Pete Hegseth, which begs the question, Jeannie, if all of this does feel inevitable, if Democrats do know Hegseth ultimately is likely to get confirmed, why we're still seeing the kind of slow walking of the procedure? Why not just let it be fast-tracked and get it all done with instead of having to do these hours of debate and stay the weekend? What's really the point if they can't stop the confirmation?
Yeah, you know, I don't think they want to make it easy for the Republicans to get this through, and they're certainly not going to do that. And I think they do have some legitimate frustrations about these FBI background checks. It looks now like Tillis may support, and I'm saying may because we don't know, Hegseth. And he has said, had he gotten different information from those background checks, he may not be there for Hegseth. And so, you know, I think there is frustration on the part of Democrats and some Republicans like Collins and Murkowski who feel that they simply didn't get the information they needed. The reality is, even if Hegseth is confirmed, and it looks like he will be tonight, it'll be by the smallest margin or one of the smallest margins in history for a defense secretary. These are normally bipartisan level votes, strong bipartisan support, something like we saw with Marco Rubio. And he's likely not going to get that. And that, I think, sets him up for a very, very tough go of it as defense secretary, which, again, he likely will be by tonight, 9 or 10 o'clock.
Well, the national security team is taking shape here. John Ratcliffe, now CIA director. That vote was 74-25. Not too bad. And next week, we've got a doozy all in one day. Kash Patel, FBI. Tulsi Gabbard, right, DNI. And then we've got RFK Jr., obviously not part of the national security team. When we think about Patel and Gabbard, though, Rick, this is going to be a heck of a day following all of these hearings that are taking place at once. Tulsi Gabbard seems to be the one at most risk of not clearing committee or not being confirmed on the floor. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think you're right. Both Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel have some headwinds. Republican senators have questioned their fitness for the posts, and Tulsi Gabbard has not seemingly been able to clear some of the hurdles around things like visiting the head of Syria while she was a congressman, and issues related to her background. So yes, there's going to be some debate around these during their hearing. I have no doubt Democrats will launch a full-scale assault on both these individuals, and we'll see how that shakes out. I mean, one of the things that is just a parlor game in the United States Senate, but assuming Hegseth clears his way to the nomination tonight with the floor vote scheduled later this evening, does that mean that they're looking for a scalp, around the nominations of Gabbard and Kash Patel? So if he goes down and for whatever reason doesn't make the cut tonight, does that make actually their ascension to their posts easier? It's a parlor game, has no real relevance, in fact, but it is what happens in the halls of the Senate during periods of time like this.
Well, and Jeannie, what we've seen so far with a lot of these confirmation hearings is a pretty partisan split, if you will, in the line of questioning. Democrats are going really hard after these nominees, Republicans less so. That certainly was the case in the Hegseth hearing, but others too. I do wonder if you think it will be as partisan, though, when it comes to these next individuals we're talking about. RFK Jr., who conservatives have a problem with on things like abortion, Tulsi Gabbard, who national security hawks have concerns about. Is this actually going to look like everybody's singing from the same hymn book, at least a little bit?
It might be. We might see some strange bedfellows. Just as an example, the issue with RFK Jr., do we see Republicans, for instance, who don't like his stance on abortion line up with some Democrats? Do we see Democrats who really do like some of what he has said about issues surrounding food safety and other things line up with Republicans? So we could in some of these see some really strange bedfellows. I'm really looking out for Kash Patel's hearing. I think that's going to be fascinating. I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats come in with big poster boards of his children's book, which has really a lot in it that people may be surprised to learn about. So some of this is going to be Democrats and any Republicans who oppose these folks using this time to get the message out about who indeed is up for a vote and letting the American people get more knowledge about who these people are. But I still think the most vulnerable here is going to be Tulsi Gabbard. She is vulnerable from both sides of the aisle at this point.
Rick, you've prepared a number of elected officials, members of the military and others, for hearings like these, for very difficult conversations that could involve very sensitive information. I wonder how much the strategy will be trying to get to these issues in opening remarks to try to get them off the table. If you're RFK Jr., do you address the polio vaccine? Do you say, I'm going to allow you to have GLP-1s? If you're Tulsi Gabbard, do you have FISA 702 in your opening remarks to try to disarm the questions that are coming?
Yeah, I think that with Kennedy, especially related to some of these social issues, and especially around abortion, he'll try to knock that down. And the Republicans will basically hold a colloquy with him. It won't be more like Q&A, but more like a conversation. And they'll say, well, of course you wouldn't be for, federal funds being spent on abortions. And he'll say, yes, of course that would be wrong, uttering the policy of the Trump administration. And then, he'll just revert back to that conversation every time he gets hit by the Democrats. I would say a little trickier for Gabbard on the national security issues, because there are Republicans who have issues with the FISA system and could actually share some of her concerns with this. And Democrats, ironically, would potentially be more bullish on some of these issues than even some of their Republican counterparts, or certainly Tulsi Gabbard. So I would watch that one as much more of a mixed bag because I think that the issues around surveillance are much less partisan and much more open to how you view the appropriate role of the United States government spying on its own citizens. And that's always been a hot button issue in the Senate, and I think one that you'll see rise up in the conversations around her nomination.
Finally, Jeannie, as we consider those who have been nominated for roles in this cabinet, I was struck by the ethics disclosures today that were released for Howard Lutnick, who has been tapped to be the Commerce Secretary, revealing he has roles in at least 800 legal entities, a net worth of north of $2 billion. Obviously, he has pretty complicated financials that somehow need to be dealt with here if he is to take this role. Does any of it really matter, especially considering other folks who have had roles in the first Trump administration and potentially this one too?
It absolutely matters. And this is something on both sides of the aisle that has long been problematic. I don't suspect we are going to see a resolution to this, but we do have to figure out a way in the US system to ensure that people that are serving the government are able to do so without being tied to businesses and other organizations that leave people wondering where their loyalties really lie. And of course, it stretches just beyond the individual, which is one of the toughest things. It stretches to their spouses. It stretches to family members. We see this both with people appointed to the cabinet, others in the White House. And again, it is not just on the Republican side. It's on the Democratic side as well, and it's in Congress. But Congress then would have to take steps to do some ethics reform, and we haven't seen them likely to move in that direction. So very, very troubling for those of us who want a ethical system in which fairness and transparency is number one in our minds.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel. They'll be back for more in the late edition of Balance of Power coming up in the 5 o'clock Eastern hour. Meantime, we still have more ahead in this early edition. Up next, we're going to take a closer look at Trump's executive orders yesterday around artificial intelligence. So stick with us right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks lower, on track for a winning week. The S&P this week up by about 1.7% for right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all trading lower, with the S&P down 14 at 6103. That is a drop of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 96, a decline also of 0.2%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index down now by 0.4%. Spot gold up $18 the ounce, up by about 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 74.66 a barrel. 10-year yield 4.62%, with the 2-year 4.26%. And Bitcoin surging 3.5%. Bitcoin at 106,730 on Bitcoin. Novo Nordisk shares up the most since August of 2023 after its experimental shot delivered as much as 22% weight loss in an early-stage trial, boosting investors' hopes for the drug maker's pipeline. Novo Nordisk shares are up 8.3%. Rival Eli Lilly up by 2.2%. Earnings news: American Express profits increased 12%, as well-heeled consumers spent more than analysts expected on their credit cards over the holidays, a tailwind the firm says it does expect to continue. American Express shares, they're trading lower right now. AXP down by just about 2.3%. Also, we heard from Verizon Communications this morning after earnings. Verizon up by 1.5%. It reported fourth quarter financial results that did beat analyst estimates. Rivals AT&T and T-Mobile will both be reporting next week. AT&T shares are up by 0.9%. T-Mobile up by about 0.8%. Texas Instruments shares now down 7.7%. After the bell last night, it gave a disappointing earnings forecast. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Limes.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, sir. Happy Friday, Charlie. I hope you have a great weekend, and thanks for being with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We have a lot to talk about today as we've been following Donald Trump on the road. He's left the bubble, first in North Carolina. He's still there. He'll move on to California a bit later on, and we'll be following his tracks as he makes his way across the country on the late edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Limes in Washington, and earlier this week, Kaylee, to think that it was all 1 week kind of has us chuckling. The AI executive order, yes, that was also this week.
That was yesterday.
That was yesterday. It was the day earlier he appeared with Larry Ellison and Sam Altman, right? I'm trying to keep the days straight in my head. Of course, artificial intelligence driving the market and driving the conversation here in Washington, with a new president seems eager to not only own the space, but take the guardrails off of AI the way Joe Biden had wanted them.
Yeah, we should remember it was at the beginning of this week, on Monday, Inauguration Day, when he signed a series of executive orders, one of them being the repeal of 78 executive actions under the Biden administration, inclusive of the sweeping AI executive order that Biden had signed, talking about safety and transparency guidelines, creating a group basically within the Department of Commerce to think about voluntary guidelines that people could subject themselves to. And it wasn't clear what was going to replace what was repealed.
Yes.
Then we got the executive order yesterday, at least one of them, which calls for an interagency group to craft a new policy within 6 months, intended not for safeguarding and that kind of thing, but to ensure U.S. dominance in AI.
Back to animal spirits, I guess.
I suppose.
If you're hanging out with Larry Ellison, though, and Sam Altman, the investment from SoftBank was $100 billion. They say it'll get up to $500 billion by the time this project is done. So here we go.
Yeah, Stargate, although Elon Musk has some doubts about whether or not that funding is there. It's a fight that's playing out in public, but we'll save that for another time. In the meantime, we really do want to talk about what this technology development is going to look like under this administration and turn to an expert in that arena. Matt Pearl is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. He is director of the CSIS Strategic Technologies Program, also former director for emerging technologies at the National Security Council. Thanks for being here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these executive orders in greater detail, but essentially, how do you read the way this administration is going to be approaching AI? How regulated will it be?
So I think that this administration is not going to be interested in examining models and looking at specific details that these companies are doing. I think they're looking to empower them. I think it's going to be a combination of if there are ways that they can use tariffs that are helpful, if there are things that they can do in terms of further deregulation, and then I think tax credits as well. And I think they're going to try to support it. and bring it along, and instead of trying to regulate it.
It's not like there's a lack of money being invested in this space. When you look at the capex from the hyperscalers, it's like its own country here. And Meta today is talking about a $60 billion investment. You can go on down the line. What does this unlock when you talk about regulations or investment? Does this hasten the end game when it comes to AI?
It remains to be seen, because I think that Xi Jinping is all in on this.
Yeah.
And I think the scale of the investments, you know, when you look at what they've done in telecom, for instance, where they've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on an industry that's not particularly profitable and in some ways is not as important, I think the scale of the investment that we're going to see there needs to be matched in the U.S., and that's going to require...
Are they building data centers on the scale that we are?
I think they have the ambitions to, and I think that Huawei, among others, are really scaling up to do that at a frightening rate. But they're not yet competitive with Google and the other hyperscalers.
When we consider Google and other players in this space who are operating learned language models, something else that is in this executive order is preventing AI systems from being built, and this is a quote, with ideological bias and engineered social agendas. Obviously, Google and others have come under some scrutiny for what is perceived to be anti-white bias or something else. How does that actually work, though? Because people are the ones who are initially programming this, and some inherent bias, I'm sure, has to be in there. Can that be unlearned by this technology?
Yeah, this is going to be very tricky for the AI companies to navigate, because content, it comes back to content moderation, essentially. It's very similar issues, right? You can't fail to curate what's going to come out of these models, and what the public sees can create all kinds of problems. But as soon as companies do that, they're going to be confronted with some of these issues about whether their interventions, for instance, did have an effect in terms of how gender was portrayed or that sort of thing. And so I think it's going to be very difficult for the companies to navigate, but I also think they're going to be working really hard with the Trump administration to make sure that they make the case that that is not something that holds them back from releasing a new model. So I think that there's a good chance that the way that it's enforced will allow them to innovate, but we'll have to see.
I want to try to get to this from a slightly different angle for a moment. How much of this, through the eyes of the White House and what's possible in, say, the first 100 days or even the next 4 years for Donald Trump, how much of it has to do with AI technology or the models that you're discussing versus energy? This is the president's going to unlock energy, and you can't get these data centers powered without energy that we apparently do not have when we talk about nuclear, but more immediately natural gas. Is that actually the lasting mark that the Trump administration will have on AI?
It very well could be, because that is the long pole in the tent, or looks to be one of the long poles in the tent, just the sheer amount of energy that's going to be needed. And I think that they're going to have to take an all of the above approach. I think obviously with something like nuclear, that's critical, and, you know, cutting through the red tape, you know, having a permitting process, getting states to approve it. I mean, I think that's going to be really critical. But there are some other technologies like geothermal that we're really seeing some breakthroughs. And so I think they're going to have to be open to all of those possibilities if they're going to be successful.
Well, so when we consider here the perhaps deregulating that needs to happen in order to accelerate it, whether it's energy creation or whether it is actually just development of this technology, what is going to be the role of those outside the White House for some of these other agencies who are usually typically charged with enforcing regulation? Just walk us through who the key players to watch here are going to be, other than like Donald Trump and David Sachs.
I think it really strengthens the role of agencies like DOD and and agencies in the intelligence community. Obviously, they're already very powerful, but they are huge customers, and they're going to use this technology and drive requirements. And so I think agencies like that are really going to have a huge role in this administration. I think that it could have an effect on agencies like the Commerce Department and others that would have taken a more regulatory role, looking at things like data centers and AI. And so it remains to be seen. I think they'll have to focus on things like export controls that the administration supports. But I think this expanded portfolio that you saw under Gina Raimondo, I think is going to narrow quite a bit for those agencies.
What does that mean for the NVIDIAs of the world then, where Joe Biden was cracking the whip when it came to export controls? Will some of those loosen for companies making sensitive equipment like GPUs?
I think that's a really good question, and it's going to depend. I think that the national security team that I've seen so far, from National Security Advisor Walsh all the way down, are very serious about that issue and are laser focused on it. And it's a question of whether the president and others in the West Wing are going to have diplomatic overtures from Beijing and decide in certain cases to go in a different direction. So I think the default is going to be to impose more export controls, or at least keep the ones we have. But we could see individual cases, particularly where suddenly it changes on a dime.
I'd like to ask you as well about cyber security in addition to this, as we consider the holistic security picture here, knowing, for example, that the Treasury Department was subject to a hack perpetrated under, at least it's understood to be perpetrated by the Chinese. How do we safeguard against that kind of thing happening? When we're talking about federal systems that are being hacked into, what needs to be done to fortify them to a greater degree?
So in the case of federal systems, and if you look at the Treasury hack, this was an example where you had a third-party vendor that was mishandling its keys. They were providing a tool to the Treasury Department that allowed IT staff, for instance, to remote into computers. And because they had mishandled their keys, the PRC actors were able to get into the unclassified network. And so that's an example of how we don't just need the federal government systems secure, we also need those third-party vendors. This is something that in the late days of the Biden administration that they started to do with their procurement power. And one of the things that's interesting, if we contrast, is you talked about the AI order being revoked. They haven't revoked the cybersecurity EOs. And I think that doesn't mean they won't make changes, and we can talk about what changes I would predict they'll make. But I think that the framework that has been used by the Biden administration, I think there are significant parts of it that they're considering keeping in order to safeguard the country.
Does Donald Trump understand these technologies? He talks about, beautiful AI and being the world dominant market for AI, the biggest developer, or is that irrelevant? Does he have the know-how on his team?
So I've never met him, so I don't want to speculate too much.
We make fun of lawmakers for not knowing how to go on.
It's all staffers.
They're holding hearings on social media. Is there an equivalency here?
But I think that in terms of getting him information and in terms of getting him really good options, I think that the national security staff and the other components in the White House will continue that interagency process where what comes to his desk is their best reflection of what the U.S. should do in the context of, his approach generally and his ideology.
He does have Elon Musk in his ear. I guess that helps.
Well, sure, and Elon Musk obviously is involved in a lot of this technology development to a certain degree. Obviously, now that he's president again, he's once again subject to the kind of intelligence that you don't necessarily get when you're outside of the White House. What kind of information do you anticipate he's getting around the technological threats facing the United States, whether it's cyber or something else? How real is that right now as we speak?
So he's getting very scary stuff. I mean, I can tell you from when I came to the NSC that it's very disturbing in terms of some of the intrusions that could impact public safety. Because we have such wonderful government officials that are working every day, as well as companies working to stop it. But I think he's going to be getting a lot of information on the threats. Obviously, I don't know the details. I no longer have a security clearance. And so I think he'll be getting good information about that.
Are these on the level of Salt Typhoon or greater?
So I think Salt Typhoon is actually a great opportunity in some ways because it is finally a public example of this advanced persistent threat that we're seeing. It's a different approach, right? This isn't just somebody breaking in. This is somebody squatting and in your walls and in your basement and in your ceiling, right? Where they gain access to the network. And then they stay there and they hoover up intel, financial data, whatever they can, and they prepare for the possibility that they could use it to disrupt financial markets, to disrupt telecom networks, and so on. And then the other aspect of it that
sorry, the clock is stopping us here.
I want you to come back and have a conversation about the things that keep you up at night, because you're going into some very interesting areas. He agreed to that, Kayleigh. We're going to take that up. It's Matt Pearl, Director of the CSIS Strategic Technologies Program, making his debut here on Balance of Power. We'll be back at 5.
Indeed.
The late edition of Balance of Power, 5 p.m. Eastern. See you then on Bloomberg.